The mighty Freusel Empire, a continental superpower, has crushed the smaller Rand kingdom. A young man named Heinrich is told to prepare for a harsh reality. His commander explains their dire situation. To fight is to die. He's reminded that as a royal bastard, his only hope is to cooperate. The word surrender doesn't sit well with the young prince, but the commander dismisses any other thought as wishful thinking. Heinrich scoffs, knowing his title means nothing to their conquerors. The commander is stunned by the prince's bleak self-assessment. He calls his own kingdom trash, much to his commander's dismay. Charming guy. Meanwhile, the Imperial army marches on, a force of 10,000 strong. They were left behind to cover the main army's retreat, just 53 men. Heinrich recalls the court's constant scorn, always treating him as a disposable pawn. But he refuses to let his past or this grim reality crush his will. His simmering rage finally erupts, shattering the cup in his grip. He questions the sanity of his kingdom's leaders for provoking such a monster. A nearby portrait of a noble seems to mock him with its idiotic grin. Truly the face of competence. The commander tries to rally them, speaking of the noble Rice family's legacy. Heinrich and another soldier are completely unimpressed by the history lesson. He laments how rotten his kingdom is, finding solace only in the low civilian casualties. He then turns to the commander, admitting he had hoped for more from him. The commander admits he knows the truth behind Heinrich's facade. He speaks of a political talent that Heinrich possesses, a rational mind and the qualities of a true ruler, but Heinrich denies it, claiming he's not fit to lead anyone. The commander insists, however, that he possesses a rare gift for leadership. He explains that by feigning incompetence, Heinrich has won their loyalty. This small forgotten unit was left behind to die. But every single man, including the commander, volunteered for this post. They chose to follow him, betting their lives on his command. His royal composure, sharp intellect, and hidden charisma, a true leader in disguise. The commander explains that Heinrich's act turned them from subordinates to loyal retainers. He wonders what might have been if the prince had actively sought the throne. But he knows that showing his true talent would have made him a target. He pledges their lives to any command, be it to fight, flee, or surrender. Heinrich tries to deflect, telling him not to burden a lazy man with such a choice. But the commander just smiles, no longer buying the prince's humble act. His expression hardens as he presses Heinrich to finally make a decision. The prince's eyes narrow, the weight of 53 lives settling on his shoulders. He asks if the commander wants them to make a reckless charge and die in glory. The commander replies without a hint of irony that he wouldn't mind at all. Heinrich lays out their choices: surrender to save their skins or fight for a doomed nation. The commander calmly replies that either option is acceptable to him. He explains that he once swore an oath to protect his country. But now, his loyalty belongs not to the Rand kingdom but to Heinrich himself. He declares that every man left in this unit feels the exact same way. Outside, the soldiers stand at attention, their salutes a silent pledge of allegiance. They will follow his decision, whatever it may be, without question. The commander smiles, urging him to make a choice he won't regret. No pressure, kid. The weight of their faith leaves Heinrich utterly speechless. And then a small, knowing smile breaks across his face. The act is finally over. Heinrich's eyes burn with a new fire. He accepts their unwavering resolve. He springs into action, ordering every last soldier to assemble at once. The commander can only stare, stunned by the prince he's finally unleashed. Heinrich reassures them, promising he won't lead them to a terrible fate. He declares they will take a third option, seizing the future even if it tarnishes their name. Within the fortress walls, the small garrison gathers to hear his plan. He addresses his fellow Death Seekers, thanking them for gathering. The soldiers just grin, remarking on his unchanging, abrasive charm. Heinrich retorts that without a little sarcasm, he couldn't handle this mess. Fair enough, kid. And his men roar with laughter, their morale higher than ever. Heinrich begins his briefing, laying out the grim reality of their situation. His men listen intently, their faces hardening as he explains the enemy's might. He reveals the Empire's first advantage, the most advanced magic on the continent, a system that turned a secret art into a weapon wielded by legions of mages. Their second strength is industrial power, mass-producing advanced firearms. But he saves the most terrifying threat for last, holding up 3 fingers. He speaks of a legendary being known as the Flame God, a master of magic. A magic god, a living weapon with the power to annihilate entire nations. He reassures them this being isn't here. because if they were, the war would already be over. Heinrich can only laugh at the sheer madness of challenging such a monster. He smiles, saying that if luck is a skill, then they are the true powerhouses. His men, however, are completely over his self-deprecating shtick. Their protests echo from the fortress, begging him to stop the grim talk. To repay their loyalty, Heinrich declares he will renounce his incompetent name. His soldiers are stunned, witnessing the leader they always knew was there. Without a word, a soldier drops to his knee. The rest of the unit follows, bowing their heads in a solemn pledge. Heinrich's eyes harden. This is his way of repaying their devotion. He tells them their loyalty has saved the kingdom, but its fall is still inevitable. The commander cries out, reminding them that this very kingdom betrayed their prince. The commander feels an overwhelming pressure, a presence he's never witnessed before. Heinrich roars that he will personally guarantee the future of every man here. He points to the royal crest, declaring that they are the true saviors of this kingdom. The lazy, incompetent prince is gone, replaced by a leader with fire in his eyes. He proclaims them to be the heroes who will be remembered for saving their nation. The commander realizes this is the true Heinrich, a talent forced into hiding. This is the real prince, the one they all chose to follow into death's embrace. Heinrich suddenly breaks character, sheepishly admitting that was supposed to be a secret. A real smooth transition there, buddy. He tells them he has a couple of hidden tricks he's been saving for this moment. The commander, ever the pragmatist, asks if these tricks will actually help them win. Heinrich flashes a confident smile, assuring them his tricks will do more than just help. His plan involves the Imperial army's camp, a move that could shift the entire war. Meanwhile, within that very camp, an Imperial commander finds the whole affair boring. His subordinate approaches, addressing the board leader as Your Excellency Klaus. Klaus doesn't deny it, looking utterly unimpressed by his own army's success. He declares that this war, this supposed grand conflict, is simply tedious. His aide is confused, pointing out they're winning with almost zero casualties. But for Klaus, a victory this easy is hardly a victory at all. A woman with an eye patch enters, dismissing the Rand Kingdom as utterly pathetic. She can't believe their enemy was foolish enough to be goaded into this conflict. Klaus is told the Rand Kingdom's leadership is utterly inept, having not seen a real war in ages. He sighs, wishing for a worthy opponent to make this tedious job feel less meaningless. The woman with the eye patch asks what he would do if something unexpected were to happen. Klaus's gaze sharpens, a flicker of interest finally showing in his eyes. A small, dangerous smile spreads across his face at the mere possibility. Just then, a scout bursts into the tent, kneeling to deliver an urgent report. He confirms their target fortress is in sight, with about 50 soldiers assembled outside. The scout seems bewildered, explaining that the enemy soldiers are in perfect formation, and standing before them all is a single man, their commander, just waiting for them. It's Heinrich, standing alone and defiant, ready to face the might of an empire. Talk about a welcome party. Klaus leaps to his feet, demanding an explanation for this absurd report. His subordinates can only guess. It's an unsettling move with no clear purpose. Outside the fortress, Heinrich's men stand in perfect, silent formation. A wild grin finally breaks through Klaus's boredom as he grabs his greatsword. He declares he's heading to the front lines to witness this spectacle himself. The woman with the eye patch is shocked, questioning his sudden rashness. She tries to stop him, arguing it's too dangerous for the commander to go. But Klaus and his officers are already rushing out, intrigued by this mysterious enemy leader. He muses whether this is a bold gambit or sheer stupidity. Either way, it's worth a look. Riding to the front, Klaus looks upon the lone prince with a curious smirk. Klaus takes in the sight, noting the man with reddish-brown hair and a warrior's build. The Imperial commander smirks, asking if he's finally met the person in charge. Heinrich's eyes narrow as he prepares to formally introduce himself. He declares his name and title, the incompetent youngest prince of the Rand Kingdom. From the perspective of the Imperial army, he is just one man against thousands. Heinrich addresses his opponent directly, acknowledging him as the famed war dragon. The man confirms his identity, Klaus Julius Freusel, son of the Emperor himself. He is the second prince of the Empire, a living legend known as the War Dragon. His personal combat prowess is feared by all neighboring nations. Heinrich then casually suggests they call off this foolish war and go for a drink. Klaus's officers can only stare, completely baffled by this bizarre proposal. The woman with the eye patch notes his audacity, questioning his flippant attitude. But Klaus just laughs, asking if Heinrich is a fool or a man worth talking to. He recalls the intel on the fourth prince, lazy, arrogant, and utterly useless. But looking at the man before him, Klaus begins to question those reports. A flicker of suspicion crosses the war dragon's face. Something isn't right. His aide immediately notices the change. Klaus's guard is suddenly up. He assumes this is all a ploy, a desperate bid to surrender and save his own skin. But Heinrich's gaze is unwavering as he rejects the very notion of surrender. The Imperial prince is taken aback, his confident smirk finally faltering. Heinrich clarifies that he has no intention of surrendering without a fight. Klaus questions the logic, asking what meaning there could be in such futile resistance. Heinrich admits that if he were alone, he would have surrendered and left the battlefield. The war dragon's gaze narrows, trying to decipher the young prince's true motive. But Heinrich explains that for the honor of the men behind him, he cannot simply yield. Klaus warns him that if they choose to fight, the Imperial army will show no mercy. Heinrich declares that this is about settling a score, a final stand for his men's sake. It is his answer to their loyalty, a duty he feels as their lord and as a man. His soldiers listen from the fortress, their faces filled with unwavering resolve. Klaus, however, is completely baffled by this reasoning. Guess honor isn't in the Imperial training manual. Klaus roars in fury, demanding the incompetent prince take back his words and beg for his life. But Heinrich just smirks, ready to face the so-called lizard prince. He then proposes an old-fashioned duel, a one-on-one clash to settle things. The war dragon accepts with a furious charge, the very ground cracking under his might. But as their blades meet, Klaus is stunned to find his attack completely stopped. The force of their collision shatters the earth, a testament to their incredible power. Heinrich effortlessly pushes back, sending the Imperial prince stumbling away. Klaus can't believe it, realizing this supposedly useless prince is more than just talk. He's a real fighter. Our boy taunts him, asking if he really thought he'd be such an easy stepping stone. The war dragon's eyes narrow, processing this new reality. To resist it all is madness, unless there's a plan. Klaus scoffs, declaring that only a true master can change the tide of war. He stomps his foot, boasting that this power is a privilege reserved for him alone. Heinrich's eyes narrow, telling the war dragon to bring it on. Klaus raises his greatsword, ready to crush the so-called useless prince. He unleashes a devastating swing, a blur of steel and fury. But Klaus's own men are stunned by the speed and power of Heinrich's defense. The Imperial prince switches tactics, trading raw power for a flurry of precise strikes. The woman with the eye patch knows Klaus's magic makes him superhuman. How is this kid keeping up? The war dragon's eyes widen in utter disbelief at what he's seeing. Because Heinrich isn't just defending, he's closing the distance, going on the attack. The war dragon unleashes a storm of strikes, but not a single one can find its mark. Heinrich's eyes are cold steel, his focus absolute as he weaves through the assault. Klaus realizes his opponent is using magic specialized purely for evasion. But is it just evasion? Heinrich's gaze suggests something more is at play. The Imperial officers can only stare in disbelief at the unfolding scene. Suddenly, the defender becomes the attacker, his own blade a silver blur. He grips his sword, channeling all his will into this counter-assault. The Imperial soldiers watch as their legendary prince is actually being pushed back. Heinrich roars, declaring that he's just getting started. Looks like someone's been holding back. He breaks through Klaus's guard, tackling the war dragon in a stunningly bold move. The war dragon's eyes widen in shock as he's thrown off balance. Heinrich sends the Imperial prince tumbling through the dirt and snow. Klaus looks up, stunned by his opponent's blinding speed. But Heinrich isn't done, hurling his sword like a deadly projectile. Klaus raises his arm, seemingly making a last-ditch effort to block the blade. The sword's tip strikes his flesh and bounces off with a metallic clang. Heinrich's own weapon is sent flying, leaving him completely bewildered. Guess skin of steel wasn't just a metaphor. He stares at his hand, unable to comprehend the hardness of his opponent's body. He recalls the rumors. The war dragon's skin was said to repel any attack. Klaus rises, declaring that mere swords and guns are useless against him. Heinrich scoffs, calling the war dragon nothing more than a flashy lizard. Klaus admits he's surprised by Heinrich's skill, but remains confident in his defense. He declares that despite the surprise, there is no scenario where he loses this duel. Klaus analyzes Heinrich's fighting style, dismissing it as pure speed with no real power. But Heinrich just grins, asking if Klaus is so sure he can't be defeated. Heinrich points out they're at a stalemate, but a duel is different from a war. He raises his hand, giving a silent signal to his men. On the fortress walls, soldiers move in unison, preparing their firearms. Heavy artillery is aimed directly at the Imperial Prince. The War Dragon's expression darkens as he realizes this one-on-one chat has guests. The Imperial officers cry out in alarm, realizing the sudden danger to their prince. But the threat isn't coming from the fortress. It's coming from their own ranks. Klaus finds himself surrounded, his own soldiers aiming their rifles directly at him. Heinrich stands across the field, now wielding two swords, his trap perfectly sprung. He explains that even the War Dragon can't evade a concentrated barrage forever. On the fortress walls, Heinrich's own men are just as stunned as the enemy. Klaus demands to know if Heinrich thinks this stalemate means he's actually won. But Heinrich acknowledges that Klaus, too, is a warrior capable of changing the battlefield alone. The War Dragon realizes the truth. If Heinrich attacks, his speed will cause chaos and casualties. With his own men's lives at risk, Klaus offers one final chance to surrender. But Heinrich's grin only widens as he flatly rejects the offer to surrender. The War Dragon's eyes narrow, calling it a shame. Klaus calls his bluff, raising a hand and ordering his men to attack. Yet Heinrich remains perfectly still, a terrifying smile on his face as his eyes begin to glow. The Imperial Prince roars the command again, expecting a volley of gunfire to end this. But a moment passes and only silence answers him. Klaus turns back, his confidence finally cracking into confusion. He demands to know why his soldiers are disobeying a direct order. One of the Imperial soldiers stares at his own hand, where a strange magical sigil now glows. Their fingers are frozen, unable to pull the triggers. Looks like Heinrich's trick was a bit more complex than just pointing guns. Klaus's aide confirms it. Their weapons and magic are completely sealed. The War Dragon can only let out a choked sound of disbelief. And then, his shock gives way to a wild, manic laugh. This is the best fight he's had in ages. Heinrich apologizes sarcastically for not launching an all-out attack sooner. With a devilish grin, he declares that the real show is just getting started. Klaus roars, demanding to know what kind of trickery this is. Heinrich calmly addresses his enemy's question about where the fool is. He offers to make a special exception and reveal the truth. He's clearly enjoying this a little too much. The Imperial Prince is stunned into silence, the pieces finally clicking into place. Heinrich reminds him of his earlier assessment, that he was just fast and nothing more. Klaus notes a strange detail. For all his speed, Heinrich's clothes barely move. Heinrich clarifies that he isn't fast. Everyone else is just incredibly slow. The War Dragon can only stare, unable to process the impossible statement. He explains that this isn't a physical ability, but a conceptual one. He reveals the truth. He has stopped the flow of time for everyone but himself. A terrifying smile spreads across his face, the act well and truly over. Klaus can only stammer, his composure completely shattered by the revelation. He roars that if this is true, then Heinrich's power is not human. No kidding, Sherlock. Heinrich then asks if this power reminds him of the Empire's own flame god. And in that moment, the legendary War Dragon knows true fear. A surge of unseen power emanates from the young prince. His hair seems to crackle with an overwhelming energy. Heinrich's eyes are no longer those of a lazy, incompetent fool. They now burn with the cold light of an absolute ruler. The pressure is too much for Klaus, who clutches his head in disbelief. He looks up, seeing not a prince but a monster in human form. Heinrich raises a single hand, ready to unleash his true power. From across the battlefield, he prepares to rewrite the rules of this war. A tidal wave of razor-sharp ice erupts from the frozen ground. Guess winter came early for the Empire. The Imperial army is engulfed, their charge shattered by this impossible magic. Klaus's face twists in utter disbelief at the sudden turn of events. He looks down to find his own feet trapped in a prison of jagged ice. The legendary War Dragon is completely frozen in place, unable to move. He roars in frustration, his superhuman strength useless against the magic. Panic erupts through the Imperial ranks as soldiers are trapped and terrified. Klaus can only watch, horrified, as his invincible army is neutralized. The entire battlefield, thousands of soldiers frozen in a single instant. The Imperial Prince can't comprehend how this is even possible. So much for an easy victory. Across the field, Heinrich stands as the calm center of the storm he created. A wicked grin spreads across his face, savoring the War Dragon's despair. Klaus finally understands. This is the power of a magic god, a living legend. Heinrich takes a single step forward, the master of this frozen, silent battlefield. The War Dragon can only grit his teeth, his rage useless against this absolute power. Heinrich stands over him, asking how it feels now that the tables have turned. Klaus roars that this war has become a complete disaster, all thanks to him. Our boy just grins, suggesting they discuss the future now that he has Klaus's full attention. But even in defeat, Klaus demands that if he is to die, his men must be spared. Heinrich sits down, casually telling the prince he's getting a little ahead of himself. He gives a dismissive wave, treating the legendary war dragon like a pouting child. Meanwhile, back at the fortress, a soldier kneels as a strange light envelops him. A soldier raises a plain flag, signaling a call for parley. Klaus's eyes widen in shock. It's a flag of negotiation. Heinrich taunts him, asking if he's really in a position to refuse. The war dragon can only stare, his mind reeling from the humiliation. His frustration erupts in a silent, disbelieving scream. Heinrich's grin is pure satisfaction. The hunter has become the prey. And with the battlefield frozen, the terms of surrender are set. Later, Heinrich admits he never wanted to use such a dramatic trick. The commander confesses he almost collapsed when he realized the prince's true power, a magic god in their midst. Who knew? Heinrich grumbles that he planned to hide his power forever, and he won't forgive the commander for forcing his hand. He explains that as the prince of a doomed nation, he had no power to negotiate. So he casually tells the defeated war dragon that his terms should now be acceptable. The commander reflects on the Empire's misfortune. They faced a god who could also talk circles around them. He then has a minor meltdown, blaming his own bad luck for this monstrous turn of events. He laughs it off, claiming he's just a timid man who wants a quiet life. Sure you are, buddy. Heinrich's face shows he is thoroughly unimpressed by the performance. He reflects that whether one is a magic god or a lord, the burdens are the same. A small, confident smile returns to his face, accepting his new reality. With the negotiations over, Heinrich walks alone across the silent battlefield. The commander places a steadying hand on his shoulder, a silent show of support. The woman with the eye patch reports that preparations are complete to welcome a magic god. In the heart of the Imperial camp, soldiers stand guard around a massive tent. She announces she has brought Heinrich to meet the Empire's own magic god, Luto. Inside, a man with spiky hair and a fur-collared cape waits for them to enter. Heinrich takes in the opulent surroundings, a far cry from a typical military tent. His eyes land on an ornate tapestry hanging on the wall. The man, Luto, explains this tent is reserved for special guests, implying Heinrich is one. He declares that the Empire respects strength above all, especially that of a fellow magic god. Luto then asks if the Empire's legendary flame god has taken an interest in Heinrich yet. Heinrich can only scoff, wondering why this guy is spilling state secrets to an enemy. Luto explains the flame god's family has served the Empire for generations, holding sway over the nobility. Heinrich recalls the image of this legendary flame god, a woman. He learns she is over 300 years old, while another apostle has lived for 150. Immortality seems to be a running theme here. With the history lesson over, Luto decides it's time to get down to business. His expression turns serious, the pleasantries officially concluded. He begins to state what the Empire requires from this negotiation. But Heinrich cuts him off, laying out his own terms with cold confidence. Luto's eyes narrow, processing the prince's audacious demand. He reflects on the Rand Kingdom's banner, admitting they foolishly started this war. Luto agrees, but clarifies that his authority only extends to a ceasefire agreement. Luto clarifies that a formal peace treaty requires the Emperor's judgment. But Heinrich reassures him, saying he's not asking for a full treaty. The Imperial magic god is taken aback by the prince's strange response. He questions why Heinrich wouldn't leverage his power for a proper peace deal. Heinrich then drops a bombshell. He only wants a ceasefire because he plans to surrender. Luto can only shout in utter disbelief at the sudden declaration. Even his subordinates are stunned, the eye patch woman trying to hide her shock. He demands to know why a man with such power would simply give up. He realizes Heinrich intended to surrender from the very beginning. Heinrich explains he has no reason to save the Rand Kingdom. Giving a magic god to those fools would be a disaster. A fair point, honestly. Luto presses him, asking what he would do if he took control of the kingdom. Heinrich just shrugs, mentioning the tedious internal politics he'd have to navigate. He explains that surrendering to the Empire would just mean dealing with another nation's problems. Luto slams the table, frustrated by the prince's flippant response to his own destiny. The text implies that a magic god's power flowing into another nation is an unavoidable outcome. Heinrich calmly sips his tea, calling his efforts a simple tax payment for the trouble he's caused. But Ludo can't accept it, insisting that a man cannot simply abandon his homeland. He notes that by surrendering, Heinrich would be branded a traitor by his own people. Heinrich seems genuinely puzzled, asking if saving his men wasn't the right call, even if it doomed the kingdom. A small, knowing smile crosses his face as he admits he's a rather twisted man. No arguments here, buddy. And so, a ceasefire agreement is signed between the Empire and the Rand Kingdom. News of the truce spreads across the land, a fragile peace taking flight. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Empire, the Emperor himself receives the report. He smiles, intrigued by a letter from Klaus about a third magic god's appearance. A young princess, Lieselot, can only stare in utter disbelief at the news. But another woman, masked and mysterious, seems thoroughly entertained. Her wicked grin promises that things are about to get much more interesting. Back in his quarters, Heinrich finally gets a moment of rest after the ordeal. He and his men are now stationed in a temporary camp, the war on hold for now. He explains the terms of the agreement, the first step in his grand, twisted plan. But Heinrich finds his men looking utterly dejected, their spirits low. The commander explains they're still processing the news of his surrender. A younger soldier seems particularly confused by his leader's decision. Heinrich snaps, telling them to just accept the situation and move on. A real people person, this guy. Outside, even the guards are complaining, feeling their loyalty has been misplaced. But Heinrich dismisses their concerns, annoyed that the Empire is now waiting on his every move. The commander asks if the negotiations were at least successful. Heinrich poses a question. What would you do if a magic god just sold himself out? One of the soldiers isn't buying it, suspecting there's a deeper plan at play. Heinrich leans back, admitting the situation is surprisingly friendly, all thanks to the capable second prince. He explains the Empire's only logical move is to try and win him over completely. They'll offer him anything he could want: status, wealth, and women. His men can only stare, trying to process this new political reality. But the thought of riches and beautiful women has them instantly on board. Heinrich immediately calls them out on their daydreams, much to their flustered denial. He sighs, admitting he despises the idea of all that tedious socializing. One soldier grins, arguing that the women would at least be a welcome perk. Heinrich just shakes his head, completely done with his perverted subordinates. He tells them they're missing the point entirely. He declares that the strongest chain to bind a person isn't gold, but emotion. His men are horrified as he explains the cold political logic of family ties. He continues, stating that a wife from a noble family is the most effective shackle, a bond that can be used as a weakness, a perfect tool to control him. He then snaps at his men to praise him, much to their bewildered annoyance. The next day, Heinrich is given luxurious quarters within the Imperial camp. He lets out a massive yawn, finally getting some well-deserved rest. He sits up in a lavish bed, remarking on how well he slept. Reaching over, he grabs a pitcher of water from the nightstand. He pours himself a drink, the first moment of peace he's had in days. A smug grin spreads across his face. This is the ideal life he's always wanted. A voice from the doorway breaks the comfortable silence. The war dragon himself, Klaus, enters the room, asking what Heinrich needs. Heinrich explains he just wanted to confirm a few things with the prince. He notes that he hasn't received any reports of his guards leaving their posts. Lounging on the bed, he assures Klaus he has no intention of escaping. Klaus tells him not to worry, and that he's free to move about as he pleases. Heinrich seems puzzled, wondering if he's always lived this way, even back home. The Imperial prince is taken aback by the strange offhand question. Klaus realizes Heinrich's routine, staying inside, reading, and sleeping, a lifestyle unfit for royalty. He declares that with such laziness, it's no wonder he was called incompetent. Our boy's reputation precedes him, I see. Klaus is still reeling, unable to believe his mighty army lost to such a man. He recalls Ludo's own stunned reaction, realizing they both underestimated the prince. The war dragon is so flustered he can barely ask for a cup of water. So much for Imperial dignity. But Klaus quickly shifts to business, announcing he's brought someone to introduce. A young woman steps into the room, her presence quiet but deliberate. She introduces herself as Azur Mirhi Rembrandt, her gaze steady and polite. Heinrich's mind races, instantly seeing through the Empire's thinly veiled ploy. He realizes she's not just a caretaker, but a high-class spy sent to watch his every move. But before Heinrich can dwell on his new babysitter, Klaus has more to discuss. The war dragon announces that a reply has finally arrived from the Imperial capital. Heinrich smiles, saying it's about time he got to read their response. Meanwhile, back in the Rand Kingdom, someone is screaming about who will take responsibility. Inside the royal court, the king's council is in complete disarray, shouting and pointing fingers. A panicked official cries out that the Imperial army is right outside their gates, but a military general roars back, telling the civilian official to hold his tongue. He insists the capital's walls will protect them long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The official fires back, asking the million-dollar question, what reinforcements? The general deflects, claiming it's the civil servant's job to handle such matters, not the military's. But his face betrays his bravado, a silent scream of utter frustration, truly the face of competence. Finally, the king himself, Rand VIII, speaks, telling them all to be quiet. This is no place for debate. The king of Rand demands a solution from his bickering council. One official slams his hand down, screaming that surrender is their only option. Another argues they must hold the castle and beg for foreign aid. But with their forces crushed, the question of how to get help hangs in the air. The general suggests sending the Crown Prince, Edward, as an envoy. But the Crown Prince is bedridden, having just escaped death himself. So much for that brilliant idea. The council descends into chaos, their only remaining plan being a suicidal last stand. Finally, the king has heard enough, his expression one of utter exhaustion. He notes the Imperial army hasn't moved, giving them a brief moment to breathe. The king retreats from the throne room, leaving his useless council behind. He walks away, muttering the name of the Imperial magic god under his breath. The king reflects that even a useless pawn can be useful for buying time. Meanwhile, a young man with bright eyes arrives in a new city, marveling at the view. He's arrived in the heart of the empire, a sprawling and magnificent capital. Peeking around a corner, he takes in the sights with a curious smile. As he walks along a river, he reflects on his journey to this new land. He's stunned by the sheer number of people, a testament to the empire's power. He wonders how they managed to coordinate an invasion across such a vast territory. Elsewhere, an official explains that the empire relies on carrier pigeons for communication. Carrier pigeons, really? The height of modern technology. His companion suggests that if Ludo were to invent a better method, he'd be greatly rewarded. His companion calls it a shame, but the traveler has already made up his mind. A carriage wheel turns, carrying him deeper into the heart of the empire. The young man stares ahead, his expression hardening with quiet resolve. Through the window, he watches a guard reading a dispatch, a piece of a much larger game. Meanwhile, Heinrich tests his new attendant, asking Azur what she knows is coming next. She plays her part perfectly, offering a polite but firm denial. Heinrich falls silent, considering her carefully crafted non-answer. A sharp grin cuts across his face as he declares it's time to make a real gamble. Their destination is a castle of breathtaking scale, the Imperial Palace. A carriage pulls up to the grand entrance, its arrival formally announced. Heinrich steps out of the carriage, finally arriving at the Imperial Palace. But the sight that greets him leaves him completely speechless. He stumbles back, nearly collapsing from the sheer shock of his reception. A young princess stands before him, flanked by an honor guard of soldiers and maids. The Imperial soldiers stand like statues, a silent and imposing welcome. The maids are just as stoic, their faces unreadable. Talk about a warm reception. Heinrich can only stare, trying to process this ridiculously formal greeting. The princess smiles, formally welcoming the ice magic god to her home. She introduces herself as Lieselot Clam Freusel, sent by the emperor himself. Her expression is one of pure, innocent delight, a stark contrast to her guards. Her warm smile seems to hold no trace of the political games being played. Meanwhile, one of his men can't help but tease Heinrich about his new, refined look. Heinrich shoots back a dry remark, clearly not amused by the commentary. They've been given the best of everything, a level of luxury that leaves them speechless. Elsewhere, the Empire's own magic god, Ludo, is also being escorted through the palace. Heinrich and his commander are led through the opulent halls, now guests in the lion's den. Ludo is led through the palace gardens, a place of serene beauty. A young woman waits for him outside a grand conservatory. Ludo seems taken aback by the sight of his host. It's the princess, Lieselot, who offers him a warm and disarming smile. The Empire's magic god immediately kneels in a show of respect. He thanks her for the honor of this meeting. Ludo then apologizes for his lack of a proper greeting when they first met. The princess seems genuinely surprised by his formal apology. She tells him to rise, reminding him that a magic god's status is absolute. Guess royalty still has to defer to living legends. Soon they're sharing tea, the princess admitting she was quite surprised by his deference. Liselot thanks him for showing such respect, even to the sister of the war dragon. Ludo explains that on the battlefield, he wouldn't dare address royalty so freely, but the princess insists that in the Empire, a magic god's status is absolute. Her gaze seems to sharpen, cutting through the polite conversation. She asks him directly if he isn't worried about being deceived. Ludo explains his caution. A magic god can destroy a nation, so a little respect is a small price to pay. Liselot smiles, acknowledging that he's as clever as the rumors say. She then asks him to drop the formal act and show her his true self. Ludo can only stare into his tea, completely baffled by her strange request. The princess tells him to relax, having heard he's a much more casual person than this. The two sit across from each other, a picture of polite society. But Ludo finds this entire situation incredibly awkward. Princess Liselot is known for her talent and intelligence, but behind that gentle smile lies an unfathomable depth. Ludo wonders just how many monsters this empire truly holds. He tries to maintain his formal demeanor, insisting it's improper to act otherwise. But the princess calls him out, asking if he's just toying with her. Ludo can only offer a strained smile, completely caught off guard. He's clearly not used to this kind of royal. Finally, he throws his hands up in defeat, dropping the stiff formalities. Liselot beams, thanking him for finally agreeing to her request. She tells him to call her Liselot or even Lisa, but Ludo is clearly uncomfortable. The princess just beams, encouraging him to drop the stiff royal protocol. Ludo finds it a bit much to just start using her nickname. This royal is playing a different game. He admits her personality is far from what he expected, but accepts her praise. Liselot notes that the rumors about him don't quite match reality either. Ludo admits he's just a normal man, unlike Heinrich, who hid his true power. He recalls how Heinrich deceived the Empire's best, unleashing his might at the perfect time. But the princess insists that she truly respects him for who he is. Ludo is completely thrown, admitting he thought she was just messing with him. With a warm smile, Liselot suggests they continue their pleasant little tea party. Ludo forces a smile, reluctantly agreeing to the princess's strange request. The next day dawns over the Imperial capital, a new game about to begin. Within the Grand Imperial Palace, the bells toll for a historic meeting. The entire city seems to hold its breath, unaware of the politics at play. Heinrich's eyes narrow, his mind focused on the gamble he's about to make. He takes a single step forward, ready to face the moment of fate. Before him stands an ornate door, the threshold to his new future. A guard announces his name, presenting the ice magic god to the court. The massive doors swing open, revealing a hall bathed in light. Heinrich walks into the vast chamber, a lone prince in the lion's den. He walks the long path to the throne, the eyes of the imperial court fixed upon him. And on that throne sits the ruler of this land, Emperor Friedrich of the Freusel Empire. But he is not alone. A woman stands at his side, a silent and imposing figure. Her expression is one of pure, undisguised contempt. This is the legendary flame god Acutia, and she does not look happy to have company. Heinrich meets their collective gaze, his own expression unreadable. The emperor speaks first, acknowledging the arrival of a new magic god. Heinrich notes the lack of formal etiquette, a clear test to see how he will react. He realizes there's no need to kneel. A god does not bow to a king, and so he accepts the emperor's informal greeting, ready to play the game. The emperor seems to consider Heinrich's bold stance with a thoughtful hum. He declares that now they can finally have a proper discussion. The emperor admits he never expected to meet a new magic god in his lifetime. Heinrich plays along, feigning surprise at being granted an audience with royalty. The imperial court whispers, shocked to be negotiating with a defeated prince. Heinrich reflects on how his appearance completely upended the entire war. He acknowledges that he has masterfully manipulated the empire to this point. The emperor cuts to the chase, asking what it is the prince truly wants. Heinrich's eyes narrow, the fate of nations resting on his next words. His answer will not only shape the empire's future, but that of the entire continent. Heinrich declares that his intentions have not changed. He has two wishes. First, he demands a guarantee for the lives and livelihoods of himself and his men. And second, for the loyal men who followed him, he demands the title of Heroes of the Nation. The emperor considers this, noting the prince's concern for his subordinates' honor. Heinrich stands firm, his resolve unshaken by the weight of the imperial court. The emperor muses that the demands are modest, but that's to be expected for a man who can have anything. With a wide grin, he agrees to the terms, declaring he will grant Heinrich his wishes. Heinrich seems almost taken aback by the emperor's quick and cheerful acceptance. He offers a formal bow, expressing his gratitude for the emperor's decision. A deal is struck. But as Heinrich turns, the emperor reveals his true thoughts. Letting a magic god escape was never an option. The emperor tells him not to worry, his expression unreadable. Heinrich reflects that a life of strict discipline is not something he can easily adopt. The court whispers amongst themselves, judging the new magic god's seemingly vulgar request. A sharp, knowing grin cuts across the emperor's face. He erupts in laughter, praising the boy's apparent understanding of finer things. Okay, Your Highness. But Heinrich's expression darkens. He had warned them this would happen. He knows that even with the empire dealt with, the theocracy remains a threat. He never expected to find an opening by exploiting his own subordinate's stubbornness. The emperor formally declares that the empire will accept the magic god of Rand. But the flame god interjects, telling the emperor to watch his tongue in a public forum. The emperor snaps back, reminding Acushia that Heinrich now belongs to the empire. But the flame god just smiles, telling him his tone is unpleasant and to cut it out. She claims she's simply following the proper etiquette for the occasion. Heinrich declares the public audience is over. Now the real meeting can begin. Ludo seems confused, wondering why an unofficial order was just given. The rest of the court is just as lost, the tension in the room refusing to break. Ludo mutters to himself, annoyed at being dragged into this political theater. Acushia's grin turns predatory as she declares this is now the domain of the magic gods. Well, that escalated quickly. Ludo can only watch, his expression hardening with apprehension. Acushia walks away, complaining about the creepy farce she was forced to participate in. Acushia smirks, formally introducing herself as the legendary flame god. The emperor grumbles that she just calls him a brat and an old hag. So much for respecting your elders. Heinrich tries to maintain a formal tone, but Acushia is clearly not interested. She dismisses the pleasantries, telling him to speak normally in this unofficial meeting. Our boy takes a moment, processing the true abrasive nature of the flame god. But Acushia's attention suddenly shifts, her expression turning cold. Her gaze locks onto Ludo, her smile becoming a terrifying manic grin. Ludo's eyes widen in sheer terror, caught in the flame god's sights. The air crackles with a sudden, overwhelming pressure. Heinrich watches intently, the true power dynamics of the empire laid bare. Acushia faces Ludo, the two magic gods locked in a silent standoff. Her smile is pure condescension, enjoying the fear she inspires. Ludo grits his teeth, asking if this intimidating display is really necessary. She offers a mock apology, making it clear she doesn't care for his opinion. Her eyes gleam with madness as she says this is exactly why they're here. Heinrich watches silently, his mind calculating every possible outcome. The pressure is so intense that even seasoned Imperial officials are trembling. The Emperor remains on his throne, his expression unreadable but stern. Heinrich wonders if the Emperor is really going to let this happen. The aura of the magic gods is crushing everyone in the room. This is a battle of wills, not words. Ludo grits his teeth, insisting he has already offered his submission. But Acushia's sharp gaze tells him she's not convinced in the slightest. He realizes she still thinks he's holding back, playing a political game. She declares that this overwhelming pressure is the true way of the magic gods. The court officials tremble, knowing their status is utterly meaningless here. Before such beings, wealth and influence are nothing but dust. In the eyes of a god, all mortals are just ants on the ground. Ludo tells her he understands, asking her to finally stop this display. But she snaps back, claiming he doesn't understand a thing. Guess he failed the pop quiz. She reveals this entire meeting was arranged to teach him two important lessons. Ludo can only stare back, completely lost by her lecture. The first lesson, she explains, is how a magic god must carry themselves in the Empire. She tells him he lacks the arrogance and dignity. Basically, he's just too nice for the job. His usual polite demeanor, she insists, is the exact opposite of how he should act. A god does not bow, she declares. They are to be revered, not respectful. His humility, she warns, threatens the very foundation of the Empire's power structure. Heinrich listens, a slow understanding dawning on his face. Power does not need to be polite. A magic god is a force that can destroy nations. They are above mortal ranks and titles. If a god acts meek, she explains, fools will inevitably see them as weak and try to exploit them. And that misunderstanding, she concludes, is the spark that can ignite civil war. She explains that even royalty cannot truly command a god. Heinrich realizes the magic gods don't serve the throne, but the man on it. The emperor is just a mortal, but his position is a symbol of that pact. A magic god kneels to no one, except the one they choose to follow. She roars that this singular loyalty is what makes the empire unshakable, a simple, terrifyingly effective system. She stands as the oldest and most loyal subject, the bedrock of their nation. Their power is enshrined, treated not as a military asset but as a divine one. A magic god's position is built over a lifetime, a legacy of absolute authority. Ludo's eyes widen with a newfound understanding, calling the system brilliant. But Akushia's first lesson is over, and her thoughts turn to the second. She is the ancient monster of the political world, the true de facto ruler of the empire. Akushia declares that Ludo will now learn the proper way for a magic god to exist here. Ludo stumbles over her name, trying to find the right way to address the living legend. The flame god just smirks, clearly enjoying his complete and utter discomfort. She explains this is a perfect opportunity to stamp out any potential chaos before it begins. Ludo is caught off guard as she announces the second, more practical lesson. With Heinrich joining them, she warns, the entire continent's political landscape will shift. A map reveals their greatest rival, the Romus theocracy, a nation whose power rivals their own. Ludo argues that with a new magic god on the empire's side, the theocracy will be forced to act. Akushia agrees with a sharp grin. He's finally starting to understand the game. The scales of power, once balanced, are now tipped heavily in the empire's favor. Akushia warns that the theocracy will soon make a desperate, reckless move. She predicts a massive conflict is inevitable, a war that will shake the continent. And at the heart of that conflict will be the theocracy's champion, Apostle Stark. Ludo listens intently, his expression hardening with the weight of this new reality. Stark is the theocracy's ultimate weapon, a force considered equal even to Akushia. He's a master of turning ordinary men into an army of superhuman warriors. Sounds fair. Akushia explains that when war breaks out, Ludo will be sent to face him directly. Ludo clenches his jaw, acknowledging that he is fully aware of his duty. And that, Akushia declares with a smirk, is why this lesson is necessary. Ludo's eyes widen in horror as he realizes what she means by a lesson. Without warning, Akushia unleashes a torrent of dark, oppressive energy. The throne room is plunged into shadow, her power consuming the light. Ludo's vision blurs, the world around him dissolving into her domain. He realizes his surroundings have been completely rewritten by her power. He's trapped, a lone figure against the overwhelming might of the flame god. But in a flash, Ludo summons his own magic to counter the assault. From the sidelines, Heinrich watches the exchange with a calm, calculating gaze. A wall of water erupts, clashing against Akushia's suffocating aura. Akushia grins, acknowledging that Ludo can at least muster a basic defense, so he passed the first pop quiz. Ludo shouts in disbelief, recognizing the overwhelming pressure as a magic god's divine authority. Akushia smirks, explaining this power is the very source of their magic. It is a force that ignores all rules, imposing the user's will directly onto the world. Ludo's expression hardens, realizing this is a battle of mental and spiritual strength. The flame god explains that the power of this authority is proportional to one's own willpower. He understands he must grasp the entirety of her attack and find a way to break through it. It is the ultimate expression of ego, bending the laws of reality to serve your own. This, she declares, is why a magic god must be arrogant. Their strength is the law. Ludo's eyes widen in horror, realizing she's about to use actual magic in the throne room. She launches a volley of fireballs, warning him to defend himself or get seriously hurt. Class is now in session. Ludo can only stare, the reality of the attack crashing down on him. The shockwave of their power ripples through the Imperial palace itself. Even the stone walls seem to tremble from the force unleashed within. Elsewhere, maids cry out in fear, but Princess Lieselot calmly reassures them. Her expression is grim. She knows exactly what this conversation entails. She notes that the impact of a magic god's authority is truly immense. Back in the throne room, Ludo realizes that divine authority grows purer with focus. Akushia grins, warning that if he does nothing, he'll be crushed before he can act. But Ludo understands. If he's inside her domain, he cannot be obstructed by it. The flame god's smile widens. He's finally passed the test. Akushia explains this is the second stage, turning a simple phenomenon into a direct threat. This is no longer a clash of wills, but a battle of manifested power within her domain. Ludo's eyes widen in disbelief at the sheer number of attacks she's summoned. He roars in understanding. A manifested authority can't be wished away, it must be fought. Each fireball, she explains, can level a castle and moves faster than sound. Talk about a pop quiz. Ludo is forced to dodge for his life as the throne room floor erupts around him. The Imperial court can only watch in silent terror, completely out of their depth. Ludo screams in fury, calling her a fool for unleashing this power in the palace. He plants his feet, ready to defend not just himself, but everyone in the room. Ludo unleashes his own magic, tendrils of water lashing out to protect the court. His magic snuffs out the fireballs, stopping them dead in their tracks. Acushia seems impressed, noting how skillfully he froze her attack within her own domain. But Ludo roars back that there's nothing impressive about this reckless display. She dismisses his concern, calling her attack a simple greeting that he should be able to handle. Ludo points to the terrified court, reminding her she's about to level the throne room. The flame god just offers a smug, unconcerned smile. She's clearly enjoying this. Her expression turns manic as she calls him naive for thinking this is the extent of her power. From the sidelines, Heinrich watches with a faint, calculating smile. He's not just a spectator. He finally speaks up, asking Acushia if this is really what she calls guidance. The flame god turns to him with a challenging grin, telling him to do as he pleases, an open invitation. Heinrich's eyes narrow, declaring that he won't be holding back. With a single sharp gesture, he unleashes his own power. Acushia taunts him, saying it's not in his nature to just stand by and watch. A chilling grin spreads across Heinrich's face as he names his spell, Blizzard. A raging storm of ice and snow rushes towards the flame god, who simply asks what he'll do next. Ludo screams a warning, telling Heinrich not to underestimate her. But Acushia's grin turns manic. She praises his raw, unrefined power. Heinrich smirks back, admitting this is finally getting interesting. The blizzard intensifies, a torrent of absolute zero aimed at the heart of the Empire. For the first time, Acushia is caught off guard, forced back by the sheer force of his magic. But hidden within the storm, a single shard of ice flies true. Acushia's eyes widen in shock, recognizing the attack as an ice needle. Heinrich grins, explaining the blizzard was just a feint to hide his real power. This single, unstoppable needle, he declares, is the true killing blow. In a flash, the needle finds its mark, piercing the flame god's forehead. Ludo can only stare, his mind completely unable to process what just happened. Acushia stands frozen for a moment, the ice embedded in her skull. Her body goes limp and Ludo's mind screams in panic. Did he just kill her? On the throne, the Emperor watches the scene unfold, looking mildly inconvenienced at best. Heinrich looks on coldly, stating that he warned her he wouldn't be holding back. But Ludo realizes that any normal person would have died from that single attack. He theorizes that a magic god's body is infused with their own powerful will. This unique physiology means magic affects them in extraordinary ways. He looks to the flame god, asking if his hypothesis is correct. Acushia seems impressed, asking if he's already figured out how to reinforce his own body. Ludo's eyes widen, his guess was right on the money. He admits that having never met another magic god, it was only a theory. But Acushia's smug grin confirms it all, and that means only one thing. Her immortal body can only be truly harmed by a magic god's full power. Ludo can only sweat, realizing the true meaning of her immortality. So not immortal, just really hard to kill. The court officials mutter in terror, unable to comprehend a deathmatch between gods. An all-out battle between magic gods isn't about victory, but about survival. A full-scale clash would erase nations and threaten all life on the continent. Even Acushia's legendary duel with Apostle Stark was never a true all-out battle, because a true deathmatch would have proven her immortality was just a title. Heinrich sighs, annoyed by this whole ridiculous and over-the-top display. But Acushia declares it's time to move on to the next phase of the lesson. Ludo's eyes widen in terror, realizing the lesson is far from over. Without warning, she launches a brutal kick directly at his head. So much for magical theory. The impact connects with devastating force, sending him reeling. Ludo is sent flying, crashing hard against the far wall of the throne room. The court officials can only watch in horror at the sheer brutality. But Acushia's expression shifts from aggression to genuine surprise. Her leg is encased in ice, shattered by the force of her own attack. She seems amused, remarking on this sudden shift to physical combat. But Ludo stands completely unharmed, shocked by his own resilience. Akushia grins, admitting she underestimated him, and asks what trick he's hiding. From the sidelines, Heinrich tells him to explain his power if this is truly a lesson. Ludo reveals his secret. He's frozen the very state of his body, making it immutable. He's also frozen his coordinates, locking himself in space. The Emperor erupts in laughter, absolutely delighted. Akushia laughs, impressed that Ludo has his own form of immortality. Even Heinrich is taken aback, marveling at the sheer creativity of Ludo's power. Akushia claps her hands together, signaling the end of the theoretical portion of the lesson. She stands across from Ludo, asking if he's ready to continue their little spar. The ice magic god and the flame god face off, the real battle about to begin. Akushia stomps forward, launching herself at an impossible speed. She moves like a human bullet, her close quarters combat leaving sound in the dust. The flame god closes the distance in an instant, unleashing a furious physical assault. So much for a purely magical duel. But Ludo remains calm, his eyes tracking her every move with perfect clarity. He raises his arm to block a devastating kick, each blow meant to be a final one. Ludo roars that without his immutability, her bare-handed attack would have killed him. Akushia just offers a cheerful, completely insincere apology. She explains this is all to prepare him for the Theocracy's champion, Apostle Stark. Ludo realizes Stark isn't just a commander, but a frontline monster himself. Akushia confirms it. Stark's personal combat prowess is the far greater threat. She demonstrates his style, a relentless assault from a self-enhanced warrior. Her movements are a blur, the floor cracking under the force of her speed. Stark is a master of both group enhancement and individual power, a terrifying combination. Ludo's expression hardens, the steam rising as he prepares for the next onslaught. He clenches his fist, realizing the true nightmare of facing a god-tier brawler. Ludo listens intently, a single bead of sweat betraying his calm facade. Akushia admits that in terms of raw power and range, Ludo is actually superior, but she laughs, claiming that without her flame's immortality, she'd have been killed long ago. She explains that even she couldn't take a full power hit from him for free. Heinrich grins, wondering if the continent would even exist if they truly fought. But Akushia's lesson isn't over. Ludo's defense is useless if he's cornered. It's like a game of chess. Once in check, he needs a move to flip the entire board. She stomps her foot, the ground cracking under the force of her next demonstration. She warns that against Stark, dodging and using magic is just delaying the inevitable. He has to find a way to win, not just survive the onslaught. This lesson is getting intense. Akushia grabs his face, bluntly stating that close-quarters combat is not his hobby. Ludo is clearly taken aback by her aggressive and very personal teaching methods. She demonstrates the simple logic: a fist is just a fist, but a god's fist is a weapon. Ludo steels himself, ready for whatever comes next in this brutal lesson. Akushia asks if he's annoyed, reminding him of his flashy duel with Klaus. She explains that was a necessary spectacle, one made possible only by his magic. Heinrich dryly notes that Ludo's close combat skills are barely at a soldier's level. The peanut gallery has spoken. Ludo remembers how he overwhelmed the war dragon with a single, decisive magical strike. But a magic god's authority negates such simple tricks. He must overcome this weakness now. The air shimmers as he prepares to face the flame god's next lesson head-on. Ludo's eyes widen, a sudden realization dawning on him. He slams his fist into the floor, testing the limits of his own power. Akushia is taken aback, her expression one of genuine shock. He's suddenly faster, closing the distance with newfound speed. The flame god is caught off guard, a trickle of blood marking her surprise. Looks like the student is learning fast. But she recovers instantly, stomping down to launch her own counterattack. Once again, she moves like a human bullet, faster than the eye can follow. The flame god unleashes another furious barrage of physical attacks. From the sidelines, Heinrich watches with a sharp, analytical gaze. Ludo meets her kick, each blow a lethal strike designed to end the fight. Ludo roars that without his immutability, her bare-handed attack would have killed him. Akushia just offers a cheerful, completely insincere apology. She explains this is all to prepare him for the Theocracy's champion, Apostle Stark. Ludo questions this, thinking Stark's power was only in enhancing his army. But Akushia warns that while his army is a threat, Stark alone is far more terrifying. He's a monster who endlessly enhances himself before charging into the fray. Sounds fair. Her foot grinds against the stone, a testament to her godlike physical power. Stark is a master of empowering the masses, but also a master of personal might. Ludo's expression hardens, the reality of his next opponent sinking in. He clenches his fist, realizing the true nightmare of facing a god-tier brawler. Ludo's focus is absolute, the pressure of the lesson showing on his face. Akushia continues her assessment, admitting Luto surpasses her in sheer offensive power. She laughs it off, saying her own immortality is the only reason she survived this long. In fact, she admits a full-powered blow from him would be a mutual loss. A true stalemate. From the sidelines, Heinrich muses that a real fight between them might have erased him from existence. But Akushia gets back to the point. Simply defending in close quarters is a losing strategy. She paints a picture of a chessboard, explaining he needs a game-changing move when cornered. With a sharp stomp, she prepares to demonstrate the next part of her brutal lesson. She tells him that simply reacting to Stark's attacks is a path to certain defeat. Ludo looks up at the towering flame god, dwarfed by her presence and the weight of her words. Akushia grabs his face, bluntly stating that close-quarters combat is not his strong suit. The flame god seems to consider his reaction for a moment, her expression unreadable. She explains the simple logic. A fist is just a fist until a god is throwing it. Ludo takes a fighting stance, his resolve hardening under her intense tutelage. She smirks, asking if he's annoyed, and brings up his flashy duel with Klaus. Ludo argues that was a necessary performance, one he could only pull off with magic. Heinrich dryly notes that Luto's close combat skills are barely at a soldier's level. He recalls his duel with Klaus, where overwhelming magic was all he needed to win. But against another magic god, that authority is diminished, a weakness he must conquer now. A wave of energy ripples through the air as Ludo prepares for the next phase. Ludo's eyes narrow, a new strategy forming in the heat of battle. He meets her next kick head-on, the floor shattering from the impact. But this time, it's Akushia who looks completely stunned by his defense. He's faster now, his counterattack catching the flame god by surprise. A trickle of blood marks her shock. The student has finally drawn blood. The two clash again, a blur of motion and raw destructive power. Ludo realizes slowing her down is impossible. He must accelerate beyond his limits. Akushia's eyes gleam, wondering how he'll escape this checkmate. He answers with a devastating blow, a direct hit to the flame god's head. Her body shatters at the point of impact, leaving her utterly speechless. Looks like class is dismissed. But Ludo reveals his true trump card, a sphere of pure, condensed magic. He unleashes it, and the throne room is consumed by a pillar of light. Akushia's grin widens. She challenges him to show her what he's truly capable of. Ludo stands at the heart of the storm, his power now fully on display. The flame god watches, her expression turning from amusement to genuine interest. From the light, a serpent of pure water begins to take shape. Akushia's gaze sharpens, recognizing this as his true divine authority. He's no longer just defending, he's preparing to unleash his own monster. She explains this is the power he'll need to face the theocracy's apostle Stark. Her smile turns predatory, the real lesson is about to begin. The two gods roar, their wills clashing in a final, unspoken challenge. And in an instant, their powers erupt, shaking the very foundations of the palace. The massive water serpent strikes, coiling around the flame god in a flash. Akushia is caught completely off guard, swept up in the torrential assault. The Imperial court can only stare in awe, witnessing a battle beyond mortal comprehension. Ludo extends his hand, his focus absolute as he commands the watery prison. He traps her within a perfect sphere, a wall of liquid with no escape. Ludo explains his technique, a prison of stagnant air making the liquid indestructible. Akushia presses against the barrier, but finds it utterly unyielding. But from within the prison, she scoffs, calling his perfect trap far too naive. Looks like he's still got a lot to learn. The Emperor's eyes widen, realizing the fatal flaw in Ludo's perfect prison. Akushia's voice echoes from within, confirming his fears with a single phrase. She explains that you can't trap a flame with water, she'll just burn it all away. The sphere erupts in a cloud of steam, sending Ludo flying from the shockwave. Ludo's eyes widen in horror. His ultimate technique was just a minor inconvenience. But he recovers instantly, a new power gathering in the palm of his hand. Now it's Akushia's turn to be surprised by his sheer, unyielding tenacity. He unleashes a blinding flash of light, a desperate all-or-nothing gambit. The two magic gods stand ready, the final phase of the lesson about to begin. And the Imperial court can only watch, completely stunned by the escalating battle. The Emperor can only watch, a single bead of sweat betraying his shock. A blinding light erupts from Ludo's palm, a final gambit. Akushia questions his sudden pause, asking what he's trying to accomplish. He declares he doesn't know Stark and can't just become the monster she demands. But he can create a feint, an opening born from pure, wild instinct. He seems to consider his own bluff, a quiet confidence settling in. Akushia calls him out on his cheekiness, questioning his audacity. But a slow, impressed smile spreads across her face. Guess the kid passed the final exam. The steam finally clears, the destructive energy of their clash finally dissipating. Outside, steam billows from the windows, the only sign of the divine storm within. The throne room stands scarred but whole, a testament to the gods' restraint. Akushia smirks, admitting her fireballs could have leveled the castle, but she can choose her targets. Even the Emperor confesses the ordeal left him utterly terrified. Ludo just glares, realizing the entire life-threatening lesson was a controlled experiment. He's left completely speechless by the sheer audacity of it all. Akushia then scolds the court, reminding them Ludo was trying to protect their sorry hides. The Emperor tries to explain the crushing weight of a magic god's aura. Ludo scoffs, sarcastically asking if there are any cute people here who need coddling. The Imperial officials can only stand in stunned silence, having been thoroughly roasted. He tells them to get a grip, adding that they are definitely not cute. Well, that's one way to end a training session. Akushia explains that a magic god's battle is a rare and valuable sight. She wanted to gauge his true power before the theocracy made its move. To see exactly how he would react when pushed to his absolute limit, Ludo mutters in annoyance, realizing they saw through his polite facade. Akushia just laughs, admitting she knew what a little brat he was all along. She turns to the Emperor, suggesting they reward Ludo for his contributions. Ludo can only stare back, completely baffled by this sudden change in tune. The Emperor agrees, telling Ludo to name his price for the valuable lesson. But our boy is completely flustered, admitting he has no real desires. Akushia scolds him, asking if he has no ambition for status or power. He just tells her to be quiet. Ludo argues that his title is more than enough reward for him. Akushia seems annoyed by his lack of ambition, but the Emperor finds his reasoning sound. Ludo insists he has no grand desires, asking only that they consider his feelings. Akushia presses him, asking if he's truly satisfied with such a small wish. But the Emperor just grins, encouraging him to name his price. Ludo finally relents, admitting there is just one thing he wants. He asks for a long vacation until his power is truly needed, a god asking for paid time off. Later that night, 2 glasses of wine are raised in a quiet toast. The Emperor sits with Heinrich, reflecting on how they gained a prince and his hero rebels. Heinrich just smirks, asking if the Emperor doesn't find this new arrangement rather pleasant. Heinrich addresses the Emperor directly, a casual confidence in his eyes. The Emperor listens, a quiet satisfaction on his face. He reflects that with Heinrich's new status, they are now his direct subordinates. The Emperor muses on how unpredictable life can be. Heinrich admits it's been an intense journey, and he'll have to get used to the new formalities. He adds that while it feels strange to be so formal over drinks, he understands the necessity. With a sigh of relief, he feels the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. The Emperor seems surprised, noting that Heinrich seems to feel a sense of obligation. Guess he expected a bit more arrogance. He asks the young prince what he truly thinks a lord is, given his short life. Heinrich explains that from the very beginning, he's had to use every ounce of his intellect to survive. Heinrich lounges on the couch, reflecting on the part he's been forced to play for the Empire. He smirks, admitting that if he's a brat, he's a terrifyingly effective one. The Emperor wonders aloud if the young prince has had too much to drink, but he's impressed by this rare candor, warning him not to get too comfortable. Heinrich pauses for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. He explains that a magic god is no longer human. Alcohol has no real effect. The Emperor listens, his gaze fixed on the boy who is more than he seems. A diagram reveals the truth. A god's body defies mortal limits, resisting age, poison, and disease. Heinrich reveals his own secret. He's used his power to freeze his body in a state of youth. Talk about an anti-aging cream. He explains that while he can't get drunk, he can still enjoy the simple pleasure of the moment. The Emperor remarks on what a convenient constitution Heinrich has. He explains there's no need to flatter a man like him. A fair evaluation is all that's required. Heinrich admits he's just letting off steam, never imagining he'd be playing on such a grand stage. But his eyes narrow. He knows he's crossed a line he can never uncross. He's seen them up close and understands now. The Empire's leadership is a den of monsters. He thinks back to the throne room, to Emperor Friedrich and the flame god Acutia, and behind them stood the true heavyweights, the unnamed officials whose power moves the nation. At the pinnacle of it all sits the Emperor, a man with the dignity of a true ruler. Even under the crushing aura of the magic gods, the court never flinched. Talk about a tough crowd. And the Emperor's gaze seemed to see through everything, right to the very soul. He thinks of the flame god Acutia, the ancient power at the Emperor's side, a being who has sworn fealty to the Empire for reasons no one truly understands. But beneath that facade is a cunning monster, a guardian deity bound to the nation itself. She is the true power behind the throne, a weapon that doesn't need to be drawn. A magic god whose experience dwarfs his own, a being who shatters reality with ease. He realizes her past is a forbidden topic, a line he knows he must never cross. He knows he could never hope to outmaneuver a true monster like her. To remain in this den of vipers, he realizes, is to invite a terrible end. Guess the welcome basket didn't include a survival guide. The Emperor's voice cuts through his thoughts, asking if something is amiss. Heinrich scoffs, admitting that no one in that court can be trusted. He states plainly that he wants nothing to do with any of them. The world of politics, he explains, is a den of monsters, and the Empire sits at its very peak. And while the Emperor has guaranteed his vacation, he knows those creatures won't simply leave him be. They will test his limits, planting political time bombs that will detonate when he least expects it. It's a game of strategy, where one must read the board and strike with audacious precision. But a magic god, he muses, is a different kind of monster, one who stands above humanity. He concludes the only way to counter them is to play the fool and avoid their schemes entirely. The Emperor seems taken aback by this surprisingly simple yet profound strategy. Heinrich insists, declaring that he is fighting for his life, to get a vacation, a truly noble cause. He just wants a break, a chance to be human without the weight of the world on his shoulders. The Emperor is taken aback by Heinrich's passionate declaration. Heinrich explains that this moment of peace is something he's only dreamed of. He looks at his own hands, scarred from a lifetime of fighting for survival. But far away on the Empire's border, a new conflict has already begun. A lone commander wonders how many of his men have already fallen. The battlefield is a storm of fire and explosions, a brutal, unforgiving war. Soldiers scramble for their lives amidst the chaos of the front lines. From the tree line, they see their enemy waiting, a silent, ominous force. The commander's gaze hardens, knowing what he must face. An impossibly large army stands before them, a tide of steel and death. So much for that vacation. A pair of hands reach out, a desperate gesture against the coming storm. The battlefield is consumed by a massive explosion, swallowing soldiers whole. Amidst the chaos, a young, dark-haired soldier grits his teeth, his face spattered with blood. He fights alongside a blonde-haired comrade, their blades a desperate defense against the tide. The very earth is torn asunder by the enemy's relentless magical assault. The young soldier's eyes widen, the horror of the front lines reflected in his gaze. His comrade roars in fury, telling him not to get in the way of his blade. But the dark-haired youth takes command, ordering his men to act as a diversion. Guess someone has to be the bait. With a blood-soaked face, he screams the order to advance into the jaws of death. The blonde soldier closes his eyes, accepting the grim reality of their situation. The blonde commander sits alone, crushed by the weight of his losses. He remembers the faces of his friends, men he drank with, now gone forever. Later, he sits with the dark-haired youth, sharing a moment of peace. He explains that the true blame for the war lies with the politicians who started it. He argues that his unit and the prince they followed are victims who deserve praise. They were the ones who ended the war, who forced their enemy to surrender. The young soldier listens intently, asking if this means they should abandon their old cause. The commander closes his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of their new reality. The youth sits alone, his mind racing as he considers their next move. He knows the time has come to act for his comrades. Above them, the sky stretches on, as uncertain as the future they now face. The scene shifts to a grand city, a picture of peace and prosperity. Its streets are filled with life, a stark contrast to the war-torn border. Citizens walk the cobblestone paths, their lives untouched by the recent conflict. The city square is a sea of people, a testament to the Empire's stability. And walking among them is the dark-haired youth from the front lines. He smiles, remarking that he knew this is what the capital would be like. He takes in the bustling streets, commenting on the nation's vibrancy. But his peaceful observation is suddenly interrupted by a familiar voice. The blonde commander rushes through the crowd, calling him young master. Well, that's a new development. He scolds the youth for wandering off alone, his exasperation clear. The youth from the front lines complains that his companion Heinrich is late. They're currently undercover, posing as a foreign merchant's son and his attendant. Heinrich remarks that their rural homeland is nothing compared to the capital's grandeur. He then asks his young master what their official schedule is for the day. The youth scoffs, calling him a blockhead for being too focused on work. He sighs, completely exasperated by his subordinate's stuffy demeanor. But then he gets an idea, declaring he'll teach Heinrich how to actually have some fun. Heinrich simply agrees, suggesting they head towards a more lively part of the city. Elsewhere, a noble-looking man and a dark-haired woman ride across the plains. Back in the city, Heinrich offers his young master a skewer of street food. Looks like lesson 1 is underway. Heinrich explains the street vendor swore this skewer was a local delicacy. He insists he should have been the one to fetch it, befitting his role as an attendant. The youth just smirks, teasing him for being so uptight about their simple cover story. He ignores the formal lecture and takes a bite of the offered food. To his surprise, he admits it's actually quite good for street fare. With the first lesson in fun now complete, they decide to move on. But as they walk, a thief's hand snatches at the youth's pouch. The young master catches the pickpocket but waves him off, dismissing him as a petty criminal. Suddenly, a much larger man shouts, pretending to have been bumped into. He and his accomplice try to intimidate the youth, accusing him of causing an injury. Looks like they picked the wrong targets. The two thugs freeze, their bravado instantly melting away. Their leader can only stammer, realizing he's made a terrible mistake. A cold sweat breaks out as they stare into the eyes of their intended victims. The youth calmly tells them to disappear, and they scramble away in terror. But his attention is caught by a sudden scream from the crowd. The same thugs have found an easier target, and he orders Heinrich to intervene. Heinrich plays the hero, earning the heartfelt thanks of the rescued woman. All in a day's work for an undercover commander. With the minor disturbance handled, the day continues on. Heinrich remarks on how lively their little trip has been so far. The youth just smirks, calling the encounter a first-class way to kill some time. The young master looks around, asking Heinrich where they've ended up. He notes the streets are filled with an unusual number of well-dressed young people. The area is lined with high-end shops, and he overhears snippets of technical jargon. Standing at a crossroads, he seems to put all the pieces together. They've arrived at the prestigious Magic Academy, so much for a low-key vacation. The youth's expression hardens, the academic atmosphere making perfect sense now. Heinrich finds his master's sudden insight rather interesting. But the youth suddenly grabs his face, catching him completely off guard. He reminds his attendant that they are supposed to be on a break. Heinrich can only tear up as his master scolds him for being too serious. He looks up at the Grand Academy, a flicker of interest in his eyes. But he quickly turns away, telling Heinrich they should leave before the work bug bites. Heinrich seems surprised, asking if his master truly has no interest in magic. The youth admits it would be a lie to say he's not curious about the Empire's advanced magic. The Empire's sorcery was born from studying and refining the traditional magic of smaller communities. He explains that his own power is a basic form of magic from his homeland. It's a field of knowledge completely unexplored by the Empire's researchers. And now, a place dedicated to that knowledge stands right before him. But he dismisses the thought, insisting he won't be dragged into more work on his vacation. Guess even a prodigy needs a day off. Heinrich can only look on in confusion, unsure what his master is getting at. The youth realizes his own magic would be the ultimate research subject for them. He knows that if he shows even a hint of interest in their sorcery, they would almost certainly try to recruit him for their studies. Heinrich muses that they'd likely ask him to replicate a magic god's power. The youth recalls that the flame god Acutia has already been thoroughly studied. He turns to Heinrich, asking him what he knows about the true cost of magic. Heinrich confirms that he understands the fundamental principles. He explains that magic uses mana to temporarily rewrite the world's laws. The youth agrees. Though it seems mysterious, it's a clear physical phenomenon. But he notes that while normal magic has rules, a magic god's power has none. He explains the concept simply. Normal magic is math, but a god's magic just writes its own answer. The youth stands silhouetted by his own power, declaring this is the essence of a magic god. He says a mortal trying to replicate it is like a child mimicking an adult, unable to grasp the true meaning. Heinrich agrees, adding that the physical and magical limits of a human make it impossible. The youth looks ahead, admitting he understands his own power well enough to know it's completely absurd. He knows that the Empire's true desire is to research a power like his. He looks out at the bustling city, aware that many are waiting for a new magic god to cooperate. The very thought seems to drain the enjoyment from his day. He waves the idea away, declaring he wants nothing to do with such a hassle. Guess the job offer is declined. With that, he turns to leave, telling Heinrich their sightseeing tour is moving on. Heinrich simply bows, accepting his master's decision. With their tour of the capital concluded, the two walk on towards the horizon. The story shifts, leaving their vacation behind for the grim reality of politics. We arrive in the Rand Kingdom, at a castle in the former Margraviate of Rays. Inside, two delegations meet to discuss the formal end of the war. An Imperial representative smiles, overjoyed that peace is finally within reach. You can almost trust a smile that wide. He formally proposes they begin the armistice talks, flanked by military commanders. The leaders of the Rand Kingdom can only offer a grim, silent nod. The representative introduces himself as Zone, a diplomat for the Empire, and the commander of the invasion force is none other than Klaus himself. An officer with an eye patch introduces herself as Lambert, Klaus's adjutant. Opposite them sits the defeated Crown Prince Edward of the Rand Kingdom, and beside him the grim-faced King Rand VIII. Their flustered Prime Minister Harry Org tries to speak. The prince cuts him off, stating introductions are unnecessary. They know who they are. But the sight before them leaves the entire delegation sweating in disbelief. Klaus and his adjutant stand with an air of absolute, unshakable confidence. The King of Rand offers a predatory smile, questioning Zone's supposed competence. Zone humbly deflects the praise, noting that Klaus is the true military authority here. Nothing to see here, just a humble civil servant. He claims he was simply chosen as the representative, a convenient pawn in the game. The King of Rand and his Prime Minister are visibly stunned by Zone's casual self-deprecation. The prince's fist clenches, his knuckles white against the polished wood of the table. The Prime Minister sweats, realizing the depth of the humiliation they're being subjected to. They're forced to negotiate their kingdom's fate in a minor noble's mansion, on their own occupied land. The Imperial delegation sits with an air of utter boredom, giving the defeated royals no chance to save face. And their lead negotiator is a man who smugly refers to himself as a mere bit player. The king's glare hardens, his royal pride pushed to its absolute limit. Zone cheerfully announces it's time to discuss the terms of the treaty he's prepared. The king takes the document, his eyes widening in disbelief at what he sees. It's not a treaty at all, but a list of the missing. The Empire's first move is a chilling one. The Prime Minister sweats, realizing the terms will cripple their entire nation. The King of Rand protests, calling the demands utterly heartless. But Zone's cold gaze doesn't waver as he asks what part is so heartless. The king can only stare back, his royal authority completely shattered. Zone explains that they should be grateful to exist at all. This is the only offer they'll get. The Prime Minister slams the table, arguing they can't even govern under these conditions. Zone's reflection smiles back, coldly stating that's their problem, not his. Well, you can't argue with that logic. He then questions the king's ability to rule, twisting the knife even further. The king can only grit his teeth, trapped by his own defeat. Zone delivers the final blow. The Empire will not concede, and refusal means another invasion. Zone's gaze is cold as he confirms their terms are unreasonable, and that's the point. The King of Rand erupts, protesting the Empire's unprovoked and brutal invasion. But Zone sees it as the natural order, a lion devouring its prey. He smirks, explaining that sending a disposable pawn like him is part of the humiliation. The king can only listen in horror as Zone lays out their options, subjugation or hell. His royal pride shatters, his face contorted in pure powerless rage. All the while, Klaus and his adjutant watch on, completely unfazed by the drama. The king turns to his son, Prince Edward, questioning his silence. The prince finally snaps, demanding they just destroy his kingdom instead of this mockery. Someone's having a bad day at the office. But Klaus and Zone remain calm, acknowledging his outburst as an expected, futile question. Prince Edward agrees, stating the Empire has absolutely nothing to gain from a truce. He demands to know why they would even bother with this humiliating charade. Zone's expression is cold as he reveals the reason. A certain individual set a condition. The prince is stunned, questioning who could possibly dictate terms to the Empire. The king and his prime minister are just as baffled by this sudden revelation. Zone explains it was a magic god they know well, who used his authority to halt the invasion. The King of Rand can only stammer the words magic god echoing in the silent room. Zone then turns his attention to the king, speaking of a son's facade and a parent's duty. The scene shifts to a memory, a young boy with a familiar, determined gaze. The king looks down at the boy, a silent recognition of the past and the power he now faces. The King of Rand is lost in the memory, trying to place the face of this forgotten son. He recalls a boy leaping from the castle walls, a strange and distant child. Prince Edward questions the impossible, that this magic god is his brother. The king's mind races. Besides Edward, there was another son, but it couldn't be him. He remembers the quiet boy who always sat alone watching the world from the ramparts, a child he had dismissed as utterly and completely incompetent. Talk about a bad performance review. The memory of that boy's stoic, unreadable expression now haunts him. Zone confirms the impossible truth that forgotten son Luto now holds the status of a magic god. The king's face contorts in pure horror as the weight of his mistake crashes down. Prince Edward is just as stunned, realizing their kingdom's fate rests with the brother they cast aside. The King of Rand can only stare, his world completely shattered by the news. Prince Edward closes his eyes, the grim reality of their mistake sinking in. Zone explains it wasn't incompetence, it was an act they were too blind to see. He reveals this entire negotiation was arranged at Ludo's specific request. The king's expression shifts from shock to pure, impotent fury. The prime minister refuses to believe it, stammering that Ludo can't be a magic god. He wonders if this is all just another elaborate trick by the Empire. But Zone points to the truce itself as the ultimate proof of Ludo's power. A magic god, he explains, is a wild card capable of changing the entire world. Talk about holding a good hand. And they, in their arrogance, unknowingly discarded their greatest trump card. Klaus's gaze remains steady, a silent confirmation of the impossible truth. But Prince Edward's eyes are wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Klaus explains that Ludo negotiated with the Empire to protect his homeland. He offered himself as a captive in exchange for the kingdom's survival. And the Empire, facing a magic god, had no choice but to accept his terms. Zone coldly concludes that the Rand Kingdom has no other options on the table. The king's hand trembles as he struggles to understand why this is happening. Prince Edward can only stare, the weight of their family's mistake crushing him. The king finally erupts, demanding to know why Luto won't use his power for them now. The prime minister agrees, screaming that none of this would have happened if Ludo had just been useful. Talk about a bad management decision. The king rages that for all his power, Ludo is still just an incompetent captive. But Klaus's cold gaze cuts through the room, questioning their definition of incompetence. He asks if they truly believe they are the competent ones in this situation. The king sputters, asking if Klaus dares to call them worse than the traitor who abandoned them. Klaus's expression is utterly dismissive. Yes, that's exactly what he's saying. He lays out their failures, exiling a key noble and then failing to stop his rampage. His adjutant recalls the chaos of the battlefield, a direct result of their poor leadership. Klaus points out that when the invasion mysteriously stopped, they didn't even investigate. Talk about dropping the ball. Even now, he continues, they've done nothing but lose face and offer no real strategy. The list of their failures is endless, a crushing weight of their own making. Klaus adds that rumors of a new magic god were already spreading in the capital to welcome Ludo. The king demands to know how they were supposed to be aware of any of this. Klaus explains the Empire intentionally spread information about Luto, but they were too incompetent to even notice. The king finally snaps, accusing the young general of getting far too arrogant. But Klaus just smirks, asking if he'd prefer to break off the truce negotiations entirely. He reveals that by the time this meeting was set, the Empire had already fulfilled its contract with Ludo. Ludo had secured a truce, but the king's own actions had already put it in jeopardy. Klaus coldly states that it makes no difference to them whether the king accepts the terms or not. In fact, he admits they were intentionally provoking him, hoping he'd reject the offer. Talk about some next-level reverse psychology. All the while, Zone listens on, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the king's fury. Klaus's adjutant watches the proceedings with a cold, unwavering eye. The king finally breaks, swallowing his pride and screaming that he accepts the truce. Klaus dryly notes the king's sudden shift from blustering rage to pathetic compliance. But the king isn't done, vowing that they will live to regret this day. He declares he'll use the truce to build his strength and crush the Empire. Klaus just smirks, amused by this sudden, baseless surge of confidence. The king reveals his master plan, get Ludo back through prisoner exchange negotiations, a truly galaxy brain move. The entire Imperial delegation can only stare back in stunned, silent judgment. Klaus's expression is one of pure, unadulterated pity for the man before him. He calmly states that he'll consider regretting it, if those negotiations ever actually succeed. The king roars that he'll get Ludo back and make them regret this humiliation. Zone just smiles, calmly confirming the truce is now in effect. The king demands they begin the repatriation talks for Ludo immediately. Zone casually presents the list of prisoners and their release fees. The king scans the document, demanding to know where Ludo's name is. But as he reads, a sudden dawning horror crosses his face. He erupts in fury, screaming at the Imperial delegation. But Zone, Klaus, and Lambert remain completely unmoved by his outburst. Zone feigns ignorance, asking what could possibly be the problem. Seems he enjoys this a little too much. The king slams his fist down, demanding to know why Ludo isn't on the list. The prime minister stammers, realizing the price is worth decades of their national budget. Zone calmly adjusts his glasses, stating that if they pay the fee, Ludo is theirs. The king protests the exorbitant price, but Zone assures him it's based on sound logic. He explains the price is calculated on the value of two other individuals, Akushia and Stark. A magic god's value, he states, is equivalent to a nation's entire military might. He smugly details the formula, factoring in years of service and economic impact. Talk about a detailed invoice. The king and prince can only stare back, their eyes wide with disbelief and rage. The king realizes he'd empty the treasury and tax his people into oblivion to get Ludo back. But he can't accept it, roaring that such a ridiculous demand will not stand. Zone calmly suggests they take a short break, giving them time to cool their heads. The prime minister can only offer a defeated agreement, his spirit completely broken. Zone scoffs, asking how much longer they intend to insult the Empire's intelligence. He remarks that this pathetic display is hardly befitting of a king. Klaus closes his eyes, having completely lost interest in the proceedings. With a decisive step, the young general turns to leave the room. He walks out without a word, leaving Zone to note that the show is over. The King of Rand completely loses his composure, screaming that he'll never accept this. Zone calmly suggests they take their time to discuss, then turns to follow Klaus. Looks like the adults are leaving the room. But he pauses, delivering one final chilling piece of advice. He warns them that those chosen to be magic gods have already cast aside their past lives. He asks if they truly believe Ludo would welcome them back with open arms. The scene shifts to a grand ceremony where a man addresses his beloved citizens. He stands before a massive crowd, declaring it an honor to have this opportunity. But from the crowd, someone watches with a critical eye. He wonders why they'd put on such a grand, ostentatious display. A young woman with a knowing smile explains it's to introduce the new magic god. The speaker continues, his voice booming across the plaza. She details the political benefits, a boost to the economy and a warning to their rivals. And sitting beside her is Luto, looking thoroughly unimpressed with the whole affair. But the woman's smile turns sly. She has one more reason for this spectacle. She reveals the true purpose, to declare them husband and wife in name and reality. Ludo argues it's just an engagement, but she insists the marriage is already a certainty. He can only sigh, realizing their opinions on the matter are completely at odds. But she smiles, explaining that for her nation, such a political compromise is a simple matter. Ludo points out he's also been saddled with managing a territory he never asked for. She seems thrilled by the prospect, calling it a good experience even if she's no longer a princess. He wonders aloud why the women from her country seem so accustomed to being disliked. His gaze drifts to Akushia, realizing the woman is comparing herself to the flame god. She's simply overjoyed, eagerly awaiting the moment she can introduce him to the people. Ludo scoffs at the idea of being supported by a good-for-nothing fiancé, but she reminds him a guardian god's job is just to be there. The speaker turns, declaring it's time to get down to business. He roars out a challenge, calling for a clash between the ice and flame gods. The two men stand as perfect opposites, a silent challenge passing between them. Ludo's gaze is steady, his resolve hardening for the spectacle to come. The official stands opposite him, a confident smirk on his face. He taunts Ludo, asking if the young god has lost his nerve. Ludo just scoffs, telling him to cut the theatrics and get on with it. With the eyes of the nation upon him, he steps forward to the edge of the balcony. He declares that he will first show them a taste of his true power. He raises his hand, and a brilliant light begins to gather above the crowd. The official addresses the citizens of the Empire, his new compatriots. The crowd below can only look up in confused anticipation. He commands them to look to the heavens and behold the power of ice. A wave of gasps and pointing fingers ripples through the plaza. The sky fills with a dazzling display, glittering like countless stars. The entire city seems to hold its breath, captivated by the spectacle. Even a mother and child stop in the street, mesmerized by the sight. A hand reaches out, catching the shimmering particles as they fall. Ludo's fiancée watches with a look of dawning recognition. She whispers its name, a beautiful, shimmering cloud of diamond dust. He declares this is his power, and it's only a fraction of what he can do. The crowd below can only whisper, a dawning understanding spreading among them. They now know that a new magic god has officially descended upon the Empire. He introduces himself as Luto, the Empire's newest Grand Duke. He then reveals his homeland is the Rand Kingdom, their most recent enemy. He admits he was once their foe, a prince of the Rand royal family. Ludo acknowledges their fear and suspicion, stating he won't deny their feelings. He tells them to aim all their doubts at him. He will earn their trust. Talk about a confident job interview. But he roars that he is not so weak as to be swayed by their whims. A god, after all, has no need for the approval of mortals. He explains that when a child cries, a superior being is there to wipe away their tears. He declares to the crowd that he has abandoned his homeland to serve the Empire. His former subordinates watch on as he explains the Emperor has given him a new purpose. He reflects on all he's gained, status, wealth, and freedom for his men. With his eyes narrowed in resolve, he knows there is only one thing left to do. He roars that he will become the Empire's shield and the spear that pierces its enemies. He waves to the crowd, telling them to accept him as their compatriot and their magic god. His fiancée watches with a pleased smile. Guess the speech is going exactly as planned. Ludo raises a hand, a final gesture to seal his vow to the people. He takes his fiancée's hand, presenting their union to the entire nation. He gives his fiancée's hand a firm squeeze, a silent signal. She looks up at him, caught off guard by the sudden gesture. Ludo then reintroduces himself, declaring his new imperial name, Ludo Sail Coin. He roars that he is now the Grand Duke of the Flozel Empire, and that the woman beside him is the third princess, Liselotte, his betrothed. Guess it's Facebook official now. The princess offers a gentle, satisfied smile at the public declaration. The crowd below goes wild, their cheers roaring in approval of their new hero. Ludo looks on, his expression unreadable as he takes in the scene. The grand ceremony fades away, leaving only a quiet, cloudy sky. But the story shifts to a deep darkness, a strange pressure building in the void. He finds himself walking through a faceless, bustling crowd. But he realizes with a start that he knows this place, this land. And standing opposite him is a man he recognizes from his past, a figure from a life he thought he'd left far behind. He knows this man is his, but the thought is cut short. His hand clenches, pulling him from the depths of the memory. Ludo sits up in bed, realizing it was all just a dream. He muses that it's the first dream he's had since becoming a magic god. Guess even deities get weird nightmares. With the morning light streaming in, he decides it's time to get up. But a soft, familiar voice greets him from just outside his room. It's his fiancée Liselotte, who greets him with a cheerful good morning. He explains that it's only his second day in this new land. She smiles, gently guiding him towards the dining table. They are in Sandarica, a coastal territory under the Emperor's direct rule. A map reveals it's a vital port, one of the Empire's most important financial assets. And this land, now called the Gascoigne territory, has been given to Liselotte. She explains it's a sign of how much the Empire values him, but she just smiles, suggesting they accept the official story for now. He scoffs at the idea of a new god being looked after by a 12-year-old girl. Guess he's not a fan of his new babysitter. She asks if he has any work planned, but Ludo simply says he'll be taking it easy. Liselotte warns him not to cause unnecessary confusion just because he's in an unfamiliar place. But Ludo clarifies that he still intends to do the bare minimum of his duties. The princess seems surprised by his sudden willingness to contribute. Ludo reflects that as a man, he can't just let a younger girl take care of everything. A little thing called pride. He declares he'll live up to the Empire's expectations for placing him here. He offers a simple solution to the port's seafood freshness problem. He'll just make ice. Liselotte seems hesitant, asking if he's sure he wants to meddle in political affairs. Ludo explains that making an entire industry dependent on one person is a terrible idea. Lieselot smiles, gratefully accepting his offer and promising to put it to good use for the people. She adds that she wants to repay the warm welcome they've received, leaving Ludo a bit speechless. A grand parade moves through the city streets, the people cheering wildly for their arrival. The crowd is ecstatic, thrilled that their new leaders have finally come to Sandarica. The royal carriage makes its way through the adoring public. Princess Lieselot offers a graceful wave, playing her part perfectly for the citizens. But inside, Ludo sits opposite her, looking less than thrilled with all the attention. He watches the cheering masses from the window, a silent observer to his own welcome party. His expression is one of pure, unadulterated boredom. Guest parades aren't his thing. The people point in awe, marveling at the sight of the legendary ice god. The procession continues, a sea of hands waving them onward through the city. Lieselot closes her eyes, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Everything is going according to plan. Back at the dining table, Lieselot asks Ludo about his inspection of the city. Ludo admits he was a bit overwhelmed by the sheer energy of Sandarica's people. He explains the whole town was buzzing with talk of their new magic god. He even learned about a local delicacy, a simple soup made from fish and seawater. Lieselot seems intrigued by the dish, then asks what his plans are for the day. Ludo decides to head out for another inspection, walking the sunlit streets. The port city is alive with activity, a constant flow of people and commerce. He takes in the sights and sounds of his new home, a world away from the battlefield. His walk leads him to a tavern sign marking a place called the Seagull Pavilion. Ludo smiles, recognizing it as the place the food stall owner had recommended. He steps inside the tavern, greeted by the lively chatter of the patrons. A young waiter with a cheerful smile points him towards an open table. Ludo takes a seat, noting that the place is far more crowded than he expected. The young waiter approaches and Ludo decides to ask him a few questions. He muses that for a supposed hidden gem, the place is completely packed. The staff rushes back and forth, confirming the tavern's surprising popularity. A smirk crosses his face as he realizes he's the reason for the sudden rush. The staff is overwhelmed, recalling the food vendor was telling everyone to come here. Guess word travels fast when a god is in town. Ludo gets the young waiter's attention, ready to place his order. He asks for some ale and a local dish, eager to try the town's specialty. The waiter cheerfully suggests a new dish, fried potatoes that they've just started serving. Ludo is taken aback, completely unfamiliar with the local delicacy. The boy explains it's not a common dish, he came up with it himself. Ludo asks if the kid was the one who invented it, noting his accent isn't from around here. The waiter explains he and his sister moved here from their hometown to work at the tavern. Ludo apologizes, feeling he may have overstepped with his questions. But the boy just smiles, saying it's only natural for someone like him to be curious. He reveals his dream is to become an inventor, and he simply loves creating new things. Ludo listens intently as the boy wonders why his creation isn't more popular. A smile crosses Ludo's face as he realizes this dish is the boy's very first invention. Ludo tells the boy that even if the idea was taken from somewhere else, it's still a magnificent invention. The young waiter blushes, flattered by the unexpected praise. The boy beams with gratitude, and Ludo flicks a coin his way as a tip. The waiter catches it, his eyes wide with surprise. He stares at the Imperial silver coin, a currency he's never seen before. Ludo apologizes for his prying questions and orders the ale and fried potatoes. The boy introduces himself as Rick, promising to give him extra service for his kindness. Ludo simply says he's looking forward to it. But he then points out a woman glaring at them, asking if that's Rick's sister. Looks like someone's in trouble. Rick panics and scurries away, leaving Ludo to wait for his meal. Ludo watches the siblings bicker, musing that they seem to get along well. He smiles to himself, amused by the strange connection he's made with the young inventor. A moment later, a steaming plate of fried potatoes is placed before him. Rick's sister approaches with his ale, apologizing for her brother's forwardness. As thanks for his kindness, she explains she's given him an extra large portion. Ludo picks up one of the fries, examining the unfamiliar food with a curious gaze. He takes a bite, ready to pass judgment on the boy's very first invention. A slow, satisfied smile spreads across his face. It's actually quite delicious. But his enjoyment is cut short by a searing pain. Guess they were fresh out of the fryer. Across the room, Rick's sister argues with some rowdy patrons, telling them the tavern is full. The men are a trio of local thugs clearly looking for a fight. Ludo takes a sip of his ale, noting that festivals always bring out the idiots. Rick tries to placate them, politely asking them to wait for a table to open up. But they're not interested in waiting, rudely telling him to get lost. Ludo muses that wherever people gather, public order is bound to fray. The situation escalates as one of the men grabs Rick by the shoulder. The leader of the group tries to intimidate the boy, demanding he get out of their way. Ludo's expression darkens. His quiet meal has officially been interrupted. Rick's sister steps in, telling the men to stop bothering the other customers. But her plea is met with violence as one of the thugs shoves her to the ground. Looks like they picked the wrong tavern to mess with. The thug warns them to get lost before they get hurt. He seethes with rage, calling Rick a worthless brat. With a roar, he lunges forward, ready to throw a punch. But his fist flies past Ludo, who looks utterly bored by the display. A simple, well-placed foot is all it takes to send the thug stumbling. The man's eyes go wide with shock as he loses his footing. Ludo intercepts his fall, slamming his face directly into the wooden floor. Well, that escalated quickly. His gaze is cold, completely unfazed by the sudden violence. The thug lies twitching on the ground, knocked out in a single move. The entire tavern falls silent, staring in stunned disbelief. Ludo calmly turns his attention to the remaining two thugs. They can only stare back, their bravado completely shattered. He tells them to take their unconscious friend and disappear. But their shock turns to rage, and they draw their blades, refusing to back down. Ludo simply raises a finger, a wisp of cold energy gathering at the tip. A knife slams into the table before them, a final, unspoken warning. Just then, a third member of their crew appears, a woman armed with twin blades. But even with reinforcements, the thugs are sweating, realizing they're outmatched. Ludo closes his eyes, utterly unimpressed by their posturing. But his focus is broken by the lingering pain from that hot potato fry. Priorities, people. A pained cry echoes out, not from the fight, but from Ludo's still-burning tongue. The female thug notes their skill, guessing they must be former mercenaries. But Rick's sister just smiles, explaining she once attended the Magic Academy. Ludo looks on, finally understanding where her confidence comes from. She proudly introduces herself as Natra, Rick's older and much stronger sister. The thug changes tactics, shouting that using magic in an assault is a serious crime. The threat seems to land as both Rick and Natra look suddenly concerned. Ludo sighs, regretting his decision to get involved. So much for a quiet meal. The thug boasts that his brother is in the city guard, vowing to see them all jailed. But Natra's expression hardens, her resolve unshaken by the empty threat. Ludo calmly tells Rick to fetch some rope. He'll be taking these thugs to jail himself. The young waiter is stunned, stammering that they can't just do that. But Ludo's gaze darkens as he explains that he has a certain standing here. Rick and Natra can only stare, confused by this stranger's sudden authority. The thug is equally baffled, unable to process what's happening. The pieces click into place. A newcomer with authority must be a noble serving the new lord. The thug sweats, realizing that impersonating a noble is a death sentence. Ludo just smirks, confirming he only said he had a certain standing. Guess he likes to be mysterious. He then suggests they all go to the city guard to clear things up. The thug completely breaks down, reduced to a terrified, blubbering mess. The three thugs lie on the floor, neatly tied up and ready for delivery. Rick cheerfully volunteers to handle the problem, dragging the thugs away himself. He takes them on a little walk of shame, warning them their futures are on the line. Rick and Natra can only stare in disbelief as their mysterious benefactor departs. But back at the mansion, Ludo is met by a furious attendant demanding an explanation. The man scolds him for causing a scene so soon after arriving in their new territory. Ludo just lounges on the couch, casually telling him he already apologized. Guess that settles it. The attendant sighs, explaining that his actions reflect poorly on Princess Liselot too. He warns that rumors of discord could spread, but Ludo just waves the concern away. Ludo sits up, insisting he understands the political implications perfectly well. Ludo sighs, deciding that if the attendant insists, he'll just have to take action. He turns to leave, announcing he's going to pay Liselot a visit right now. He explains that a late-night visit will prove to everyone that they're on good terms. The important thing, he notes, is the gesture itself. It doesn't matter if she's already asleep. He tells the attendant to follow if he understands, but not too closely. Can't be seen with the help, after all. The attendant asks if Ludo is seriously trying to lecture him on political maneuvering. Ludo confirms that's exactly what he's doing, waving him off as he leaves. With that, he strides down the grand moonlit hallway of the mansion. He breaks into a run, determined to see his plan through. He finally arrives, standing before the ornate doors of the princess's chambers. He confirms this is the right place, his resolve firm. He knocks and announces his presence to the princess. From inside, Lieselot recognizes his voice, a hint of surprise in her tone. She opens the door, asking what brings him here at this hour. Ludo apologizes for the late visit, asking if he's caught her at a bad time. But she just smiles, explaining she was simply enjoying the view of the moonlit sea. He explains that his attendant was worried he was neglecting his fiancée, so he's decided they should spend some time together to deepen their bond. A purely political move, of course. Lieselotta's smile turns sly as she calls him bold for such a late-night visit. Ludo meets her gaze, his own expression unreadable in the dim light. Ludo clarifies his intentions, telling her she's free to refuse his company. But she just smiles, admitting it was a little payback for his sudden arrival. With the game over, she formally invites him into her private chambers. The doors to the balcony are open, revealing the vast, starry night. He steps inside, a stark contrast to the room's opulent decor. Lieselot gestures for him to sit, taking control of the conversation. Under the moonlight, she asks what he wishes to discuss at this late hour. Her smile is knowing as she asks if this is about matters of state. Or perhaps, she suggests, there's another reason for his visit. She asks if he's here to discuss them taking separate actions. Now that's a loaded question. Lieselot's smile is pure provocation as she asks if he's ready to make their union official. She places a hand on his shoulder, assuring him she won't object if that's what he truly desires. Ludo is momentarily stunned, caught completely off guard by her bold proposition. But his shock quickly melts into a knowing smirk. Okay, two can play at this game. He tells her that while it's cute for a child to act grown up, she's a bit too young for this particular act. He explains that her attempts at seduction just look like a kid playing dress-up. Lieselotta's expression sours, her carefully crafted facade completely crumbling. She can only let out a defeated sigh, her little test having failed spectacularly. She admits he skillfully sidestepped her trap, leaving her with no room to argue. Ludo just smiles, telling her the whole act was far too easy to see through from the start. He points out the obvious distance between them, stating her seduction was clearly all for show. Lieselotta listens as he explains that only a fool would fall for such a half-hearted attempt. He continues, noting that a woman truly trying to close the gap would be far more proactive. Ludo smirks, adding that if she can't even put on a convincing act, the whole thing is pointless. Guess her acting career is over before it started. The princess's confident facade finally cracks under his sharp analysis. She closes her eyes in defeat, admitting that he's absolutely right. But Ludo's tone softens, and he apologizes for being condescending and treating her like a child. Lieselot looks up, surprised by his apology, and quietly berates herself for her own actions. He smiles, explaining they've only just started getting to know each other, and a real relationship is still a long way off. She agrees, suggesting that's exactly why they should talk more and build a genuine connection. Lieselot's smile is genuine as she agrees this is the first step for them as a couple. Ludo shifts the topic, suggesting they discuss his observations from the city earlier that day. She gestures to the moonlit city below, inviting him to begin. But the story cuts away to a different time, a different place, and a new energetic face. A young man with spiky hair stands in a bustling square, excited to be in the city of inventions. As he walks through the crowd, however, he finds the atmosphere surprisingly dull. He stops at a market stall, his curiosity piqued by one of the items on display. The vendor explains his apprentice made it, offering it as a cheap gift for a lady friend. The young man just laughs, cheekily telling the vendor to have his own partner buy it instead. As he walks away, the vendor reveals the item is a product of the Rewrote kingdom. He finds the traditional patterns of a distant western country quite interesting, but his attention is suddenly caught by a familiar face in the crowd. It's Rick, the young waiter, who recognizes the man with a start. The spiky-haired man is just as surprised to see the young inventor here. He confirms it's Rick from the Seagull Pavilion, a long way from home. Rick beams with joy, thrilled that the stranger actually remembers him. The man asks him to wait a moment, wanting to have a word. He turns back to the vendor, deciding to purchase one of the fabrics. He asks if there are more like it, wishing he had the money to buy them all. Talk about a window shopper. The vendor thanks him, explaining he's been a staple in this city for a long time. The man promises the vendor he'll visit his main store in the future. He then rushes back to Rick, apologizing for keeping the young inventor waiting. Rick wonders why he bought the fabric, noting the man usually just window shops. The man grins, admitting his love for rare things is what brought him to this city. The young inventor listens intently, a look of understanding on his face. He then asks if Rick is also here for some shopping, but the boy seems hesitant. But Rick's hesitation melts into a proud smile. He's here to open his own stall. The man's eyes light up, clearly intrigued by the boy's ambition. He places a supportive hand on Rick's shoulder, a gesture of encouragement. Rick gets flustered, downplaying his creations, but the man is just eager to see them. The man grins, telling Rick to lead the way, promising to buy anything that catches his eye. A title card appears identifying the boy as Rick, the inventor of fried potatoes. A memory flashes by of Rick's simple, earnest dream of becoming an inventor. The scene cuts back to Luto, who reflects on his new, weighty title in the Floisel Empire. Back in the city, Rick points his new friend towards his humble market stall. They arrive at a dusty courtyard where vendors lay their wares on simple blankets. The traveler looks around, noting the less-than-prime real estate. Talk about starting from the bottom. Rick explains that without connections, this was the best spot he could get. But his mood brightens as he spots a familiar face, announcing his sister has returned. Natra calls out to her brother, her presence a welcome sight in the bustling market. Natra recognizes the traveler, realizing he's the mysterious customer from the tavern. Ludo smiles, recalling how he'd hinted at his noble status back then. He tells them not to worry, explaining he doesn't usually flaunt his authority. Natra then asks what became of the thugs they dealt with at the Seagull Pavilion. Ludo pauses for a moment, a slightly awkward smile on his face. He casually explains they were sentenced to forced labor in the mines. Guess they won't be bothering anyone for a while. Changing the subject, he eagerly asks to see Rick's latest inventions. On the blanket are an assortment of tools, hangers, and other strange contraptions. Ludo is genuinely impressed, noting the high quality of the metalwork. Rick proudly explains that these are the fruits of his hard work and dedication. Ludo asks if Natra is the one who crafted the metalwork. Rick explains their family owns a magic workshop, and Natra handles the crafting. Ludo is impressed, noting that her skills are highly sought after, but Natra humbly states she's just happy to support her brother's dream. Ludo realizes the two siblings are all each other has. He asks for a recommendation, and Rick eagerly presents his best work. He holds up a strange device, calling it a treasure for any camper. A bold claim for a little metal stick. Ludo's gaze sharpens, his curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar tool. Rick proudly introduces it as a high-performance fire starter. He demonstrates how a simple strike creates a powerful spark, but Natra cuts in, completely unimpressed by her brother's dramatic sales pitch. She argues that a regular fire starter is perfectly fine and much cheaper. Rick insists his version works even when wet, making it a worthy investment. Ludo picks up the device, his interest clearly piqued by the siblings' debate. He tests it himself, and a brilliant spark confirms the young inventor's claim. His expression turns serious as he asks Rick exactly how he created it. He quickly apologizes, realizing his tone might have been a bit too intense. Ludo rephrases, asking if Natra's magic was used to produce it based on Rick's idea. He then asks if they have a prototype or even a fragment of the original. The siblings exchange a knowing glance and confirm that they do. Ludo's expression is dead serious. He's seen something of immense value. He tells the siblings to pack up their stall and stay away from the invention fair. Without another word, he tosses a coin over his shoulder, a payment for their time. But this isn't just any coin. It's marked with the crest of the Grand Duke. He instructs them to bring it to the Gascogne ducal residence in the coming days. Rick and Natra are left speechless, completely baffled by the sudden command. He presses for an answer, and they quickly stammer their agreement. With a final wave, he tells them not to be late. Guess that's one way to make an appointment. The two can only watch him go, their minds reeling from the encounter. Elsewhere in the city, a man with a stern look on his face seems to be searching for someone. The stern-faced man is Ludo's attendant, who's apparently been tailing him. He explains he has another message for Ludo to pass along. Ludo holds up the fabric he bought, asking about its significance. The attendant explains it's a unique import, which is why he bought it. Ludo cuts to the chase, asking what the actual message is. The first instruction, invite Rick and Natra to the mansion, but keep it on the down low. The attendant reveals he was also watching the siblings, calling them promising talent. He then confirms that Ludo showed them the ducal crest, a symbol they won't soon forget. Elsewhere, another merchant sells similar fabrics, urging his own people to succeed in the city. The attendant gives Ludo one last warning not to get carried away, but our boy is already gone. Back in the moonlit mansion, Ludo tells Lieselot he has two things to report. The princess leans in, intrigued by this sudden shift in conversation. Ludo admits it's a serious matter, the kind of political talk he despises. Lieselot's eyes widen slightly, her surprise evident. She notes that for him to bring up politics, the topic must be truly important. He gets straight to the point. He saw divine soldiers in the city today. Her playful demeanor vanishes, replaced by a sharp, focused gaze as she demands details. These aren't just any soldiers, they are the blessed followers of the magic god Stark. They are tactical-level mages, enhanced into a formidable fighting force. A walking army, basically. Lieselot recalls a chilling memory, watching a single one decimate an entire elite Imperial squad. Ludo explains that Stark can bestow his power upon anyone he chooses. This makes the divine soldiers easily replaceable, even if they're just children. They are tactical-level mages, but also expendable pawns for covert missions. Lieselot asks how he identified them, knowing they must act fast if the enemy is moving. He admits it was pure chance. He doesn't know the full scope of their plan. Ludo then asks if she's familiar with a magic god's unique aura, their divine authority. She confirms she's heard of it, recognizing it as the source of their immense power. He explains that he saw that very aura emanating from one of the figures in the city, but while he could sense their presence, their exact mission remains a mystery. Lieselot's gaze turns cold. Deploying them so openly is a bold and unpleasant move. Ludo explains he can only confirm their presence in his territory, not their broader movements. Lieselot muses that they might be moving with the full expectation of being discovered. With the details still unclear, she decides to prepare her own forces to respond immediately. Ludo's gaze is sharp. He's already thinking several steps ahead. He reveals he's already deployed his own men to keep an eye on the targets and their surroundings. But he admits his soldiers aren't spies. They can't dig too deep into the enemy's plans. Lieselot decides to contact the Imperial army for reinforcements as soon as possible. She asks if his men are now free, explaining the Empire separates a noble's forces from the main army. Politics, am I right? Ludo recalls hearing about the military being streamlined, only to be yelled at by his attendant to get back to work. Lieselot confirms this is to avoid confusion and clearly separate the chains of command. She explains that any large-scale military action falls under the army's direct command. But to counter the divine soldiers, she'll need to formally request Ludo's aid. Ludo's expression hardens. His men are under his command, not just peacetime freeloaders. Lieselot smiles, pleased by his reliability, and agrees to relay his intentions. Ludo's eyes narrow with resolve. If they act, it must be without mercy. With the first report concluded, Lieselot asks about the second matter he mentioned. He waves it off, explaining it's less urgent and completely unrelated to the divine soldiers. The princess looks confused, asking if it's not another political issue. Ludo explains he found some promising talent in the city and invited them to the mansion, a little headhunting on his day off. He muses that it would be a waste not to recruit such a skilled inventor for Lieselot's cause. Lieselot notes that for him to personally scout someone, they must be truly exceptional. But Ludo admits there's a slight concern he needs to address first. The princess looks up, asking what kind of problem he's referring to. She asks what he plans to do if his concerns turn out to be true. Ludo gestures, stating that at the very least he won't simply ignore it. His expression is grim. When the time comes, he'll do what needs to be done. The scene shifts to Rick and Natra's room, where she's scolding him to get some sleep. But Rick is too anxious, wondering what tomorrow will bring for them. He can't believe they've actually been summoned to the ducal residence. He finally decides to sleep, while Natra quietly contemplates their unbelievable future. Natra lies awake, reflecting that this is all because of her carefree younger brother. She stares at the ducal coin, admitting that this summons is an almost unbelievable honor. It can only mean that the mysterious noble truly recognized the value of Rick's invention. The story then shifts, delving into the past of the young inventor himself. A title card introduces him, Rick Ambrose, a strange and enigmatic child. From a young age, he possessed knowledge far beyond his years, which unnerved the adults around him. But Rick paid them no mind, determined to put his unusual knowledge to good use. His dream was simple: to make life more convenient, a desire that forged his path as an inventor. The flashback turns to the Ambrose family workshop, a time she now recalls as their happiest. Natra's expression saddens as she thinks of her parents, hinting at a tragedy in their past. Natra recalls their tragedy. Robbers attacked their parents, forcing her to quit the Magic Academy. Left with nothing, they eventually found work with the kind owners of the Seagull Pavilion. After so much hardship, she thinks this might finally be their chance for a better life. The next morning, Rick is buzzing with excitement, seeing the ducal summons as their ticket to success. But Natra's dream is simpler. She just wants a peaceful life for her and her brother. That night, Rick watches over his sleeping sister, vowing to protect her no matter what. She murmurs his name in her sleep, completely unaware of his silent promise. With a determined smile, he knows he has to make this opportunity count for both of them. He's ready to seize the best possible future, all for his sister's sake. But back in the mansion, Liselot is stunned, asking Luto to repeat his last statement. Luto's gaze is cold, his decision already made. He repeats that if his suspicions are correct, he'll have to dispose of them. And by them, he means both Rick and his sister, Natra. The next day, the siblings arrive at the Grand Ducal residence as summoned. Luto enters the room, casually apologizing for the wait. Rick and Natra jump to their feet, stammering that they just arrived. He tells them to relax, explaining this isn't a formal audience. But Rick explains that the ducal coin got him a VIP escort straight to this room. The young inventor is finally realizing their mysterious benefactor is a very big deal. Luto pauses, remembering he never actually introduced himself. Guess it's time for the grand reveal. He formally introduces himself as Luto Sailcoin, the Grand Duke of Gascogne. The siblings can only stare, their minds struggling to process the revelation. Luto watches them, his expression unreadable as the truth finally sinks in. The realization hits and they drop to their knees, begging for forgiveness. Luto seems a bit taken aback by their sudden, terrified groveling. Natra takes full responsibility, offering to accept any punishment in her brother's place. Luto can't help but smirk. They're taking this respect for nobility thing a little too seriously. He tells them to relax, explaining their past interactions are forgiven since he hid his identity. But Luto hesitates, struggling to find the right words for what comes next. Natra rises to her feet, vowing that she will protect her brother no matter what. Luto asks if her fierce protectiveness comes from a bad history with nobles. Rick looks on, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. Luto's gaze sharpens, intrigued by her unwavering vow to protect her brother. Rick tries to explain that their bond is more than just family. It's all they have. Luto muses that their circumstances must mean they are each other's only relatives. He then sets the stage for an interrogation, telling them to speak freely. But he gives a chilling warning. Any lies will be met with severe consequences. The siblings can only stammer their terrified agreement. Guess speaking freely has its limits. Luto pauses for a moment, his expression unreadable as he prepares his questions. He finally reveals the reason for the summons: Rick's invention from the day before. Luto confirms the device's properties, easier to use and works even when wet. He calls the high-performance fire starter a truly magnificent invention. Rick and Natra are overjoyed, beaming at the unexpected praise. But Luto's tone shifts. He has a question that's been bothering him. Rick eagerly asks what the Grand Duke wishes to know. Luto's expression turns grim, the friendly demeanor completely gone. The young inventor is caught off guard by the sudden chilling atmosphere. Luto finally asks the question, why did Rick decide to invent this specific item? Rick beams, explaining he just thought a waterproof fire starter would be convenient. Luto acknowledges the logic, but recalls Natra's more practical argument from the day before. Luto points out that a normal person wouldn't bother reinventing the fire starter. Natra looks on, completely lost as to where this is all going. Luto muses that inventors often pursue ideas that others would deem pointless. But he adds that there's something about Rick's case that just doesn't add up. He notes the complex procedure, which required Natra's magic just to create it. Rick is speechless, the sweat beating on his forehead as the walls close in. Luto explains that this leads him to the fundamental question at the heart of the matter. He can accept Natra's skill, but not that she'd follow her brother's blind instructions. He finally asks the damning question, why doesn't Natra know how it was truly made? Rick can only stare back, completely cornered by the Grand Duke's inescapable logic. Ludo reasons that to handle such technology, one must possess the knowledge to match it. He concludes that Natra, the mage, wouldn't blindly follow her brother's lead on such a complex process. He finally asks Rick if his invention wasn't an invention at all, but based on a pre-existing model. Ludo theorizes that Rick didn't invent it from scratch, but knew with certainty that magic could create it.